earn a half credit less of PE and health and a half credit less of arts than is generally required for a student to earn a diploma. They have included all of the student data that was requested of them, and they have also included their approvals of both their board and the state charter school board, who is their authorizer. And they've included as well data about how frequently the waiver is used. And it has been used a little more the last year than it was in the previous 2 years, but even at that, it was 13 students that used it out of their student body. So it wasn't a large percentage of students in their student body who needed to use the waiver. They only had 13. Joining me here today is the principal of Ames. His name is Brett Wilson. And so he is here and will be able to answer any specific questions that you might have about the waiver request and how it applies in their school. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Chair Lear.
Thank you so much, Michelle. That was very helpful background. We've seen a couple of other schools make the same request, the same kind of charter schools. So this should not be brand new. And in full disclosure, I do work with Ames, but I have not worked with Ames on this issue at all. I feel like I feel very confident in discussing this with the committee. I will not vote just because I work with Ames in other areas. So with that, does the committee have any discussion or questions for either Michelle or Principal Wilson at this time?
I don't, Chair Lear, but I do have a motion if you're ready.
Let me just look and see if there are other, I do not see any other questions or comments. My screen looks a little different this morning. So without any further questions or comments, let me also add, I do appreciate that Ames did provide a more complete set of data that I have requested from other schools. And it is helpful to know how many students are requesting this waiver, how much it's been used, and what the bigger picture looks like. So I do appreciate that. With that, Member Booth, we'd love to hear your motion.
Thank you. And I too appreciate the additional information and understanding the context of this waiver and its use by students at Ames. I would recommend that the committee recommend to the board that we approve a waiver of R277-700 for Ames.
Any discussion to that motion? The motion is that, and I probably should have repeated it first. The motion is that the committee approve the waiver of R277-700 as described and discussed for Ames, the Academy for Math, Engineering, and Science. All those who are, is there any further discussion? I'm sorry, I get the discussion parts short shrift. Any further discussion? I see none. Would the committee members please vote? Oh, and I said I wasn't going to vote. And I'm not going to vote. And I see the vote is complete and unanimous. And Kathy, I'm sorry, I was mistaken and should not have voted. So it would be 4-0 in that vote. Thank you. And to the next, and then thank you very much for all of those who attended. Thank you, Brett. I know that was a little anticlimactic for you maybe, but the committee appreciates what you've presented, and we've heard this from other schools, so we've had the policy discussion previously.
Okay,
with that,
thank you.
Michelle, thank you. With that, Michelle, do you want to proceed to the next item?
Yes, the second waiver request is coming to you from Box Elder School District, and they are trying to put the individual waivers that they have of the 4-day school week for their rural schools eventually will come to you all at one time. This is a new one. This is not a renewal. This is for Snowville Elementary School. And this is a sister school to Grouse Creek and Park Valley Elementary School. If I recall correctly, that they have about 26 students in all there. So it is also one of those very small rural schools that is located far from the nearest town, 40 to 90 miles from the nearest towns. They have this year hired one principal who will be serving all three of these elementary schools. And so to have them all on the same schedule will make it so that they can have professional learning communities with the teachers, and that one principal will be able to work with the staff at all three schools on the same schedule in having those professional learning communities. They also believe that based on what has happened at the other two elementary schools, that it will increase attendance of both staff and students in allowing individual families and employees to schedule appointments and make errands all happen on Fridays. So they have a weekday that they're able to have those things happen that they have to go away from the community for. Today, we're joined, I believe, by Assistant Superintendent Keith Meekum, and the principal is Melissa Morris. I'm not sure if she's on the list or not.
So she's with me right now, Michelle.
Okay.
We're both here to could answer any questions you'd like. Thank you.
Thank you, Assistant Superintendent. I'm finished, and so I will turn it back over to you, Chair Lear, and to those individuals if you have questions.
Thank you so much. And again, Michelle, I appreciate your really thorough background work. And at full disclosure, I also work with Box Elder. I haven't worked with them on this request, but I fully support it. I won't be voting. Keith, do you have anything? Assistant Superintendent Meekum, would you like to add anything to what Michelle has said in terms of an explanation or further information?
I don't think so. We feel really great about where we're heading with those three remote schools, and having a very capable, qualified principal. It's just going to allow us to really do a good job with all three small communities. Size of 8, size of 40, and size of 20, 5 or 6. It would be really advantageous for those three schools to work better together if they were on the same schedule. So we'd appreciate your consideration.
Thank you so much. Do any committee members have any questions for Assistant Superintendent Meekum or for Michelle about the background she has researched for us and provided? I see no questions. I think a motion is in order. And Matt, would you please make that motion, or do you have a question? Either one.
I'm happy to make a motion if we're ready.
I think we're ready. Thank you.
I move that the committee forward a recommendation to the board to waive the requirements in R277-219 pupil accounting of 180 days per school year for Box Elder School District, Snowville Elementary.
Thank you. And I just, for clarification purposes, I think it's 419. We just have a little typo in that first paragraph. So I think the rule that's affected is 419. To repeat the motion is that the committee approve the waiver request from Box Elder School District that is a waiver of parts of R277-419 pupil accounting. Any final discussion to that motion? I'm not seeing any from committee members. Please vote, and I will recuse myself, Kathy. Cindy, Matt. I see the votes complete 4-0. Thank you very much. Thank you for attending, and thank you, Ms. Morris, for your attendance. And also, thanks a lot again to Michelle for doing such thorough background work for the committee. Next item on the agenda is, we're moving along at such a rapid clip here. I'm not sure. I see, there she is. Debbie Davis is here. So the next item on our agenda is item 2.3, and it's another action item about an amended rule, the audit procedure under R277-116. And
I think we skipped, I'm sorry, I think we skipped one. There was a data request.
Oh, yes, you know what?
That one's been removed from the agenda.
Okay, I apologize. Let me flip to the next one then.
Okay, and we reorganized this agenda several times. It could have been either easily me or you who was confused, Michelle. So not a problem. So we really are moving to R277-116, the audit procedure, and we will turn this to Debbie Davis or Ben Rasmussen to explain this, talk about the background of this rule and the changes that are proposed.
Absolutely. I'm not seeing Ben. I think he's over in Finance Committee, so I'll jump on. Can you hear me, Chair? Okay.
Yes,
So Debbie
go ahead.
Davis, yes, I'm the Chief Audit Executive for the State Board of Education. Happy to be with you this morning. So R277-116 outlines the audit procedure that we follow when we do internal audits. The Internal Audit Department is governed by the Utah Internal Audit Act. And you'll see references to that act in the rule. You'll also see that that rule requires us to follow professional internal auditing standards, and those standards require us to have policies and procedures. So those are the standards or rules, regulations by which we do audits. Internal audit is dedicated to continuous improvement. And so as we saw the board bylaws being revised, as we were updating our policy and procedure manual, we recognized there were some changes we thought would be good for this rule as well, to simplify and clarify, make sure that we're being very transparent about the audit process. There was some duplication that we removed, things that are already in Utah code, so they didn't need to be included in rule. And also identified a couple of conflicts. Okay, sorry, I was seeing a chat come up. We identified a couple of conflicts with the Utah Internal Audit Act, so we removed that as well. So that's where these changes are coming from. We did run some of them past the audit committee. So the audit committee was well aware. And then as things were evolving with a couple of audits that are currently in process, some additional revisions to the rule were made as well. So I don't know if you want me to walk through any of the changes. I'm definitely happy to answer questions. There is some, there's new information in the rule. There's new requirements in the rule or again, clarity, transparency in the rule. There's some rewording, reformatting. So not everything is new, even though it might look like there are substantial changes. Some of it's just reformatting and rewording. And then, like I mentioned, we removed, if there was conflict or duplication, we removed language for that as well. So that's the context and the background, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Okay, and let me just make sure, Kathy, our very capable secretary assistant, keeps track of public comment. Kathy, was there anyone who wanted to make public comment on this rule?
No, I don't have anyone signed up.
Okay, perfect.
Tracy, I'm not sure which one she wants to make comment on.
That's helpful. Thank you. I do have a question from Member Hymas. Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, at the risk of taking up a lot of time, I would be interested, Debbie, if you could help walk us through some of these changes. Just, you know, when I read it, my mind goes somewhere. I'd like to hear directly from you what your thoughts were and your committee, your group.
Great. I appreciate that also. Thank you, Matt. Debbie, go ahead.
Sure, absolutely. And I'll try and just kind of go through by line item, so whoever is running that can go with me. If you first look at lines, is it 16 through 19? We removed a couple of things there. The reason we removed information on lines 16 through 19 is because that is referring to external audits that LEAs receive, that they get, and that is covered in R277-113. So that's why we made that change. As we scroll down, let's see, I'll go to definitions next, maybe hit more of the high points. But if there's something I go over that you would like more explanation on, please let me know. Utah code outlines who internal audit can audit. And previously the rule had a definition for agency that was limited to LEAs essentially, but Utah code also includes educational entities. So we changed the definition of who we can audit from agency to audit client so that we're picking up education entity, and that's line 31. So that's why we made that change right there.
And
someone scroll.
Can I just stop you for 1 second? Matt,
Sure.
do you have any questions while Debbie's explaining these, please? Just politely jump in and don't necessarily, yes, because you made the request, please don't worry about going through the chair at this point. Just ask Debbie if you have questions as she's proceeding through the rule. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Go ahead, Debbie.
Thank
Can we scroll down on the screen?
That would be great. Deb, I know she has to talk and scroll at the same time. Debbie, can you do that?
I'm not actually presenting on the screen. I'm not sure who is. So I will try and say what line I'm on. And is it Michelle or you?
Michelle.
Perfect.
Who's ever driving, please kind of scroll down if you can, consistent with Debbie's discussion, if that's okay. Thank you. There we
Sure,
are.
Thank you, Michelle. Yeah, so I just explained about line 31, why we made the change from agency to audit client, which is inclusive of educational entity, which is we're allowed to audit educational entities as outlined in Utah code. So that's why that's there. The change with the definition in chief audit executive down in 39 through 43, we actually pick up some of that language down below further. But we recognized that some of this duplicates what's in the Utah Internal Audit Act, such as we're appointed and reports to, is that line 42 maybe, to the audit committee, that's in the Utah Internal Audit Act, and that we're independent of agencies subject to board audit, that's in the Utah Internal Audit Act. So again, trying to simplify, if it's in the Utah Internal Audit Act, we didn't think it needed to be included here as well.
Debbie,
oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, can I jump? I don't want you to go over this again, but can I jump back and what is an example of an education entity?
Sure, absolutely. And I wish I could pull right out of my head exactly what Utah code says, but it's entities that receive funding or from the State Board of Education. So for example, right now we are auditing the Utah Restaurant Association Foundation. That's in our audit plan that the board approved, looking at the ProStart program. So they would be considered an educational entity. So someone receiving resources or funding from the State Board of Education.
Interesting. Thank you. That clarifies that.
Sure, absolutely.
I think another example would be a regional service center.
Yes, that could be an educational entity.
Go ahead, Debbie.
Does that also include like USSA or USBA?
Where the board does not provide resources to those entities, I do not believe those would be included. That's something probably if it came up and the board was interested in an audit there, we'd want to check with our assistant attorney generals to see if that would fit the definition. But off the top of my head, speculation, I'm saying probably not.
Yeah, and I wonder, I don't want to confuse it. That's great. Go ahead, Debbie, go ahead.
Sure. So on line 44, and then you'll see on 49, we have a couple of different kinds of reports. There's a draft audit report and a final audit report. In the previous rule, we talked about preliminary reports or initial reports, and it was getting a little bit confusing. So we've simplified and said, essentially anything when the report is in process is going to be a draft. It's going to be unfinalized, and that's listed on line 44. And then on line 49, a final audit report is the one that's accepted by the audit committee and the board. The board has to accept it. And then you'll see on line 51, we use the word generally, which is kind of a vague term. But the reason why we said a final audit report is generally classified as public, the vast majority of our reports are public reports, but on occasion, there may be a report that is protected. In my 7 years with the State Board of Education, we've only had one of those reports, and it was specific to an individual. And so that's why that report remained protected. So anyway, that's why we're using the term generally there. And that's kind of what that on line 52 is a reference to GRAMA. We are always going to follow GRAMA classifications with our reports to make sure that that's accurate. The next lines, it's 53 and it spills onto the next page down to 62 is a definition of improper payment. You may have heard this also called a disallowed cost. Disallowed cost is kind of the older term. Improper payment is the new term. And we actually took this language from Federal Uniform Guidance. They use these definitions as well. And as the State Board of Education and our LEAs, we're all subject to that Federal Uniform Guidance. we decided it would be good to be in alignment and consistent with the federal uniform guidance. That said, we did tweak it just a little bit to make sure it was specific to state use for the state. But an improper payment is when an audit identifies a question cost and then it goes to the board, and then the board will decide, is it really an improper payment that needs to be paid back? So we didn't have this definition before, but we're using it. And so to be transparent, we really wanted to make sure everyone understands what an improper payment means. And I will say 54 through 56 is kind of the general statement of improper payment. And then 57 through 62 are kind of specific examples of what that means. And we put those in because that's what's in federal uniform guidance. And again, we wanted to be very transparent about what an improper payment could be. So that's why we included that definition.
What's sorry,
yes.
Debbie, what's the state tweak on that? You mentioned that you tweaked it just a little bit.
Yes, sure, absolutely. If you look at the federal definition, it talks about federal awards and federal terms and conditions and those kinds of things. And so we left that kind of language out that was specific to the federal awarding agency, the federal terms and conditions, federal statute. Those were the things that we removed. We actually didn't include all of the language with the definition as well. There were some other things that it got into, again, specific to federal regulations. And so we wanted it to be as brief as possible, but also as transparent as possible. And so that's what we pulled. And I'm happy to send you federal definitions if anybody wants them as well.
Debbie, Matt, go ahead. Were you still?
Well, I didn't know if things had been removed or things had been added, and it sounds like things were just removed.
Yes, removed. Yep, yeah. That's pretty much it. Yep.
Thank you.
And I would, Debbie, I would ask if, are you thinking that this amendment or this definition is exhaustive, or is it illustrative? Is it supposed to define the types of things? There's nothing in here that says such as, or, and it's pretty broad. So it'd be hard to, I can't in the moment think of something that would be outside of this, but I'm just trying to ask if, not trying, I'm asking if this is supposed to be an exhaustive definition, or if it's giving us illustrations.
I think it is more exhaustive in how they've termed it, because you're right, they're not using such as an overpayment or a payment to an ineligible recipient. The fact that they're listing these out, I think they are trying to be exhaustive, and the federal government does have a lot of experience with improper payments. They look at it quite frequently. And so I think they are trying to be very specific about this is what an improper payment is.
Okay, thank you.
So then if we go to lines 67 through 76, this is another definition, and this is questioned cost. We use this in audit as well. These terms are used frequently. And again, this is coming from federal uniform guidance, and we would have done the same thing, review it, see how can we make sure it's applicable to the state. So we would have taken out some of that federal terminology that did not apply. I know there was some question we've had frequently about like line 71 where it says adequate documentation. And what is adequate documentation? Who decides what that is? And I want to make sure it's clear that we have to look at this definition in context of the entire audit process. So we're not going to get to, first there has to be an audit finding, which is going to be based on criteria that's established in law or rule or by best practice. And adequate documentation will be specific to the program or the funding stream that we're looking at. So it's very difficult to define or to try and more specifically define adequate documentation. You'd have to do it on a very specific level. And so again, this is the federal government uses this. Getting a phone call. So we are using the federal best practice definition here, and this is the terminology they use. The same with on line 73, where it says, does it appear unreasonable or does not reflect the actions of a prudent person? That can seem very broad, but again, these are terms that are used frequently in audit, and it's a part of an entire process. and an audit client has the opportunity to respond, to provide documentation, and there's due process. So that helps mitigate that if an auditor were to go rogue or something and put something out there. But I wanted to point out, we recognize these are broad terms. Not sure if there's any questions on that definition, but we wanted to be transparent since we do this is a term that comes up frequently in audit. We wanted everyone to know this is what we mean. Okay, not seeing any questions, so we'll roll on.
I'm sorry, Debbie, I was muted. I did note that it said because of an audit finding, which supports what you just said about looking at this definition in the context of a specific audit or an item. So thank you. Go ahead.
Absolutely. So then looking down on Chief Audit Executive Authority and Responsibilities, this is where we really pick up, and we're referring to the Utah Internal Audit Act. If there is information in the bylaws about the audit committee, there could be board policies that are relevant. We're required to have a policy and procedure manual, and this is how we operate. We are required to have these items, and that's how we operate. And so a lot of language we removed is because we're referring to those items. So you can see things that were taken out there. On the next lines, 85 through 94, took out a lot because it's included in those items. You'll see, I'll just skip down to R277-116-4, which was Superintendent Authority and Responsibilities. This section was removed as well because of that reference to the Utah Internal Audit Act. And that act is the one that essentially specifies who has what authority related to internal audit. And usually if you have an audit committee, they retain a significant amount of authority. And in our case, it's called an appointing authority. The board is our appointing authority. They essentially give the audit committee different authorities. And so because this is covered in the Utah Internal Audit Act, that's why we remove section 4 here. So then the new section 4 is audit client responsibilities. And essentially, and some of the things we removed here, lines 137 and beyond that, that's included in the Utah Internal Audit Act as well. So we specified that on 136, and essentially it's just that they'll cooperate. Then 116-5 is the audit process. And because we made some substantial changes as far as reformatting and things, we deleted the whole thing and then we just put in new information and really tried to just walk through the process. So you'll see on 195 where it says at the initiation of an audit. So we're starting with the audit. We're going to make sure we send an engagement letter. We're going to be transparent. We will hold an entrance conference with the audit client. We're specifying, who we will talk to, the local administrator, and then making sure we say we will conduct the audit on line 200 in conformance with the standards, professional standards, and that's required by the Utah Internal Audit Act. And then a couple examples of that is inquiring, requesting and obtaining documentation or evidence. And that's pretty much the audit process. It's very short in the rule. And so the rest, kind of starting on 206, starts the report process. And we talk about how we will have a draft report. It will first go to the audit committee. That's 206 and 207. And then once we've taken that report to the audit committee, they get first eyes. And again, it's a draft. Anything could change at this point. The draft report is based on evidence. It is based on the standards that we're following. But then we will give a copy of the draft report to the audit client. And we will, if they request, and this is new on line 214, they have the opportunity to request an exit conference. This has always been an option, but we just tried to clarify what this process looks like as far as what an exit conference is. And to ensure this is done in a timely manner, we've set some timetables here. So you'll see on line 214, it talks about the audit client needs to request an exit conference within 7 days. And then the exit conference should be held no later than 14 days from the date the draft report was provided. So this is a new section, but again, trying to be very clear and transparent about the process and make sure that we don't want audits to go on forever, right? At this point in the process, we've done the work, we've looked at the documentation. And so it's time to talk about the report, make sure we're going in the right direction and move from there. So after we have the exit conference,
Debbie,
yes.
let me stop and ask just a quick question there on the 14 days.
Sure.
Does that give plenty of time for both audit client and your staff to hold that in a time and consistent with this rule, because there's no flexibility in it? Do you feel comfortable with that?
I am comfortable with that. We went back and looked at our timelines that we're subject to with the legislative auditors, the state auditor's office. We looked at timelines that we've used with our internal audit reports in the past, and generally with exit conferences, once we give them a draft, it's usually within maybe 5 to 7 days when we actually hold an exit conference. It usually happens like a very reasonable time period based on my experience.
All right, we can revisit if necessary. Go ahead.
Sure, absolutely. So once we have the exit conference, if requested, we'll take that information back and decide if revisions can be made to the report. And if revisions are made, we still have to follow standards. We still have to have appropriate documentation. On occasion, additional documentation is provided. However, I will just reiterate that the best time to provide documentation is during the audit process before we work on the report. So after that, then we do kind of a final draft that's sent to the audit client, and then they have 14 days to provide a management response. And you can start working on that management response, usually even when you get the draft report. So all things said, well, it's 14 days, it could be up to 28 days really to work on the response. But that's outlined there. There is a possibility for an audit client to request an extension. This isn't new, it's always been there. That's line 233. You can request an extension. Just it's a matter of contacting us, giving us the justification. We've given these in the past. So it could be beyond that 28 days to even provide a response. And then I think everything else in here it was already there. Again, we just reformatted it. We wanted to make sure it was in order and very clear. So that takes us down through line 247. I guess I will say on lines 244 through 247, that's where you'll see for the audit committee, they can provide direction to staff. They can propose recommendations to the board regarding the release. And this is where you'll see those definitions with question costs and improper payments come up. The audit committee can make recommendations about that so that the board will have really good information to make a decision. And so we put that in there. We wanted to make sure that was clear also. And then the last section, 249, lines 249 through 254, this is new. And we could say, is this really necessary? Because it really just points to rules to R277, 102, and 114. But again, we just wanted to be very clear about what's the process once the audit's done. Once the board has taken action, what can the audit client do if they feel they need to do something? And so this just clarifies that process. So that's why we included this due process section in the rule. And then the final section that you can see starting on 256 that we deleted, audit reports, that's all in the Utah Internal Audit Act. And since it duplicated, we just removed it.
Thank
so
you.
In a nutshell, there you go.
That is so helpful. I appreciate your thoroughness. Matt, did you have further questions on that?
No, thank you so much.
It was very good use of our time. Other committee members who have questions? I see none. I really appreciate, Debbie, that the terms you use throughout the rule are consistent. I noted that you consistently use audit client now, you consistently use some of your new terms, and that makes it, I think, much more accurate to be able to read and interpret for the public too as well.
Thank you.
So I see no further questions from the committee members. A motion is in order. Someone would like to make a motion.
Chair Lear, I'll be happy to recommend that the committee approves R277-116 draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
Thank you. The motion is the committee approves R277-116, draft 1 on first reading forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. Any further discussion to that motion? Again, thank you to Kathy Davis or Debbie Davis and her staff for your excellent, clear technical work on this. I think it's really an improvement and very helpful. With that, let's take a vote, please, committee members. I'm looking at the vote and it's unanimous. So thank you, Debbie, and thanks for that walkthrough. And we'll move on to the next item, which is item 2.4. I gotta remove my vote. There it goes. The next item is item 2.4, R277-123, process for members of the public to report violations of statute and board rule. This is a new rule, and I have listed Angie, who doesn't seem to have joined us yet because of the other committee, and Debbie Davis. So Debbie, are you comfortable stepping through this rule with us?
I am. I will do my best. I'm not Angie, but yes, absolutely. As you mentioned, yes, do you want me to just jump right in?
Hang on one second, Debbie. I have a question from Vice Chair Davis. Cindy? Oh, no, it's just your vote. I lied. Never mind. Go ahead, Debbie. Sorry to interrupt. Go
Sorry,
ahead.
I guess I'm just so excited on all these votes. I'm just punctuating them forever. I apologize.
Not to worry. I am used to them disappearing on their own myself, so not a problem.
Same,
Go ahead, Debbie.
I'm in the habit.
Absolutely. So this rule, as mentioned, is a new rule, and essentially the purpose you can see there really on lines 10 and then through 14 is the purpose. But we do have a section of Utah code which requires the board to establish a process and rule for an individual to bring a violation or an allegation of a violation of statute or board rule to the attention of the board. In the past, we have the public education hotline and it has functioned in this capacity, but we never actually had the rule as was required in code. So this rule essentially codifies the current process with the public education hotline. So there were several of us that came together and collaborated to make sure to just really put this language together and make sure we were being comprehensive. Again, codifying the current process, but making sure that we were including, there are separate processes if there's an allegation with special education, for example, or with educator misconduct needing to go to UPAC. So the public education hotline may take those concerns, but we always refer them. That said, those types of concerns don't necessarily need to come to the public education hotline. So you'll see we called that out a little bit further down in the rule. Let's see, I'll find it really quick. 47 through 49, that's kind of where it talks about there are specific types of concerns that have to be resolved in other ways than the public education hotline. But otherwise, really what we did is, again, codify the current process. You'll see we have the information. It's on the board's website. We'll take a concern any way anybody wants to bring it to us. The more information we can get from the individual, the better. And that's outlined on 30 through 39, just the information they can provide. And then 40 through 44 talks about internal audit, does a preliminary analysis. We try and figure out the best individual or entity to actually look at the concern and resolve it. And then we refer it where it needs to go. So we do have a high referral percentage with the public education hotline, probably close to 90%. Those are either going back to an LEA or to a different section of the State Board of Education. So we do refer. We did recognize that in referring, there's a possibility that a concern might not get resolved. And so that's where, starting on line 58, we said, well, what if someone needs to resubmit a concern because it didn't get taken care of? And they can do that. We've outlined a process here where they essentially come back to the public education hotline. Then we'll look at it again. We'll make sure it's within the jurisdiction of the State Board of Education to look at. And then this rule does give internal audit the authority to request some information, conduct a preliminary investigation. This is not approval to do an audit or anything like that. It's a little higher level investigation. Essentially what it would do is say, is this legitimate? And if it is, then we'd come back to the audit committee and say, maybe we need to do an audit. So we did build that into the process as well. And then you can see the last section, 123-5, starting on line 71, if something's substantiated, right? And that's where we, again, outlines you can go to the audit committee. We could go to the superintendent to implement a corrective action in accordance with R277-114. But if it's not substantiated, then we will notify the individual as well. So we tried to be comprehensive. We had several individuals weigh in on this, but we're happy to answer questions if you have any.
Matt, Member Hymas, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Just a couple of questions, Davey, if you could. In subsection 4 or section 4, you mentioned when they resubmit, out of curiosity, does anything ever make it to UPAC on this level, or is this something that would not make it there? I know that UPAC is a criminal, deals with criminal activity, but would something ever make it there?
On a resubmission? So I would say generally, and we take every hotline on a case-by-case situation. And generally, if we identify educator misconduct up front when a concern is presented, we will make an immediate referral to UPAC. UPAC then, or the executive secretary, which is Ben Rasmussen, I believe, for UPAC, then makes a determination. Do I have enough information, or can I get enough information? And he will take that to UPAC to say, should we open an investigation? So there is a possibility that we could go through that process. Ben could talk to UPAC and they could decide not to investigate. And if that happened, at that point, the individual could come back again and say, well, UPAC didn't resolve it. We would like to resubmit it. And at that point, internal audit would look at it again and say, well, is there anything else we can glean? Let's work through the process. Is it legitimate? And then we'd have to see from there if there's anything else we can do if it's within the jurisdiction of the State Board of Education. Did that answer your question?
It does. Chair Lear, do you mind if I continue for a minute?
No, go ahead.
Does the internal audit work with the individual who submitted it, or is it simply a submission? We'll look into it.
So internal audit doesn't work for individuals. But we want to get as much information from the individual as possible, because that helps with the investigative process. So we will work with the individual to get as much documentation, as much understanding of the circumstance as possible. If there's additional individuals that could corroborate a story, we can work with an individual to get that information. That doesn't mean we're always reporting back to them, and this is where we are, and this is what's happening. That's dependent on the situation, what information we can provide, if it's protected or not. But we will work with individuals to get information so we can do an investigation as needed.
And you follow up with them, because I'm looking at section 3, subsection 5, line 42. Thank you, whoever's running the show. You're doing amazing. It just says, upon review of the information described, internal audit staff will refer the alleged violation to the applicable LEA. Does the reporter get feedback on this? I thought I read it somewhere that will reach out, the USBE staff will reach out to the person who reports it, or is that not?
I believe it. So that would be lines 49 through 51, and you're correct. We try, in some cases, individuals will specifically request a response. In some cases, just the way they word it, you can tell that it's kind of implied. Our practice is unless they specifically say, I don't want a response, we try and note it. We will notify them. We received it. We referred it. Here you go. So we're trying to provide them as much information as possible. But yes, that would be lines 49 through 51 on the response that will be provided.
Okay, thank you. Chair Lear, I do have a couple more questions, but I'd like to give opportunity to other committee members before I ask them.
Thank you so much. I was just going to ask if that would be okay. And can I just add to what you just said, Debbie? I think there is a little bit of, I'm trying to think of the exact word. Schizophrenia is not right, but sometimes these reporters these reporters to the hotline want to be anonymous, but if they also want a thorough investigation, and it's not exactly that, but if they want a thorough job by the audit, by whoever's responding, sometimes that anonymity is not possible. So I just wanted to note that there is a little bit of a catch-22 in there for the person making the report. And I think that's something you just have to work with as you proceed. So I just wanted to note that. So Matt, we'll come back to you. Member Klein have the next question or questions.
Yes, so I'm just looking back at what initiated this rule. Looks like it was from statute that was passed back in 2020. Is there a process for, I'm just surprised that we're just barely getting to this, creating a rule like this, considering it's something we should have dealt with a year ago based on when the statute was passed. I don't know if
Natalie, or just a comment?
3401. So what is the process? I don't know if that's an appropriate question for right now, that the board goes through to make sure that statute is followed up on in a timely manner instead of, catching something a year later.
And that's maybe it's probably more of an Angie question, but Debbie, do you want to respond to that?
I can provide a little bit of context, but you're right. Angie could definitely speak to that better than I could, since this is more her realm. I know at the end of legislative session, we put together the public education summary, which includes all of the bills that were passed, the language, and it assigns a responsible person and an action that's needed to take place. And I honestly don't know exactly what the process was with this piece of legislation that required the rule, and where, I don't know if a ball got dropped or it was just in process and it was just down the list based on all the priorities we have. That would be an Angie question. But I believe the process is as described. We put together the public education summary that outlines who should be responsible for that. So that's probably where I would start to look and see, okay, well, who was initially assigned, what happened? And now, of course, here we are at this point, we're getting it taken care of.
And I guess we can make a little bit of a COVID claim for another year or so.
Possibly.
COVID excuse. Natalie, do you have other questions?
Well, I do have a question. I've had parents that have submitted very detailed reports with incredible amount of evidence based on, the whole issue with the critical race theory and issues being taught in their classrooms. And it was submitted to the hotline. It was referred to UPAC. UPAC looked at it and said, we're not going to deal with this. And yet it was in clear violation of certain Utah statutes, which this statute that spurred this rule is very clear on, that any board rule or education code or state statute that it violates, that they're supposed to deal with it. So I'm just somehow this rule outlines what is already in place as far as that process, but it appears that process isn't working.
So,
if this rule, the way
Chair Lear, this is Michelle. I can comment on that if you like.
written addresses.
Natalie, you're breaking up a little bit, but I think you're asking
Yes.
what the.
I think I understand her concern.
Go ahead, Michelle. Michelle, Assistant AG. Michelle.
Yes, this is Michelle Buse, Assistant Attorney General. Some of the complaints or allegations that come into the hotline are not things that are under the jurisdiction of the State Board of Education or UPAC. So there are some that in terms of selecting curriculum and delivery of curriculum would be something that would be under the purview of the local board or the charter board, the governing board of the charter school. And so there are times when, as Debbie said, it's referred, the referral goes to an entity, an education entity that has jurisdiction over that. And so UPAC doesn't cover every single act that a teacher might do. A lot of those are employment issues, and selection of curriculum is something that is for a local board. And so the local board should step in and work with that teacher. Another issue is when it is about personnel issues, it would be up to the local board to make that decision if they were the entity responding to it, to determine what level of information would be appropriate to share with the parent who submitted the allegations. So I realize there's probably frustration sometimes when personnel actions are taken and they are private matters that are not made public to that parent. So whether there was nothing done at all or whether the parent just was not made aware of what was done could be two different outcomes that are happening.
Well, I know in this situation that they told the parent that they just weren't going to deal with it, and nothing happened on the local level, and that's why the parent went to the hotline and moved it up to UPAC, because it was not being dealt with at the local level. So is there some kind of process for parents who their concern is not being adequately addressed at the local level, where it feels like the system is trying to protect itself instead of protect the interests of the parents?
May I respond to that?
I know it's a complicated issue.
I think it's Debbie that's trying to respond to that. Go ahead.
Sure. I think there's a few different things that could be looked at in this circumstance. I think first is that section, the new section, starting line 58, 123-4, on being able to resubmit, and then internal audit of the board can take a deeper look at that point. So that's one thing that we've done. You've also mentioned, hey, this isn't being taken care of at the local level. Well, sometimes it really matters who are you talking to at the local level. And in R277-113, each LEA is required to have an independent hotline where they can receive concerns as well. And that should go to, there are some LEAs that have an internal auditor, some not, but where they are required to have an independent hotline, that hotline is required to be independent of daily management operations. So of the superintendency. So either you have an independent internal auditor, or it goes to a board member who is independent, hopefully an audit committee member. They're all required to have audit committee members. So that could be another direction that a parent could go, asking about where's your independent hotline. And then I guess a third question would be, and this isn't my realm, so I'm not sure exactly what the process is for UPAC in deciding, what they look at and what they don't, and what information is needed. So that could be another area to look at if we think there's concerns there, and Ben could speak to that better than I could. But if we think there's a problem in that area, that's a place the board could ask for additional information on. But hopefully between those three, we really are trying to take care of concerns that parents bring forward.
Okay, so when you say those three, you mean the USBE hotline, the resubmission process, and the independent LEA hotline.
So
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so the ability to do a resubmission is new. So the resubmission, the opportunity to contact the independent hotline at the LEA is an option. And then just again, if the board wanted to get more information about UPAC's internal process for how they're filtering concerns that they get, that's something that the board could request that I'm not qualified to provide information on at this point.
Okay, Natalie, you still
thank
have another follow-up?
That's it.
Thank you.
That's all.
Helpful. Let me just also add briefly, dealt with some of these issues for many decades of my career, and I've got to say this process is an informal process, not unlike legal processes, and sometimes there is not a satisfactory recourse to solve a problem, and that's just a human condition despite how well we lay out the procedures. So I appreciate this, but I do acknowledge that sometimes not every complaint is going to be perfectly dealt with. Thank you. Member Davis, you have next questions.
I think Debbie kind of answered my questions. I was really asking if we're communicating to the public and how we're doing this on what pieces are appropriate employment pieces and what people are appropriate license pieces. Like, you know, if someone had a concern, do they complain to the people who are responsible in employment issues, or do they complain to the people who are responsible in license issues? Because UPAC is licensing and, you know, the LEA is employment. And so I think there's been some misunderstanding out there, because I've seen a lot of things go to our hotline that typically you would get a call, like if if there's a teacher showed up drunk, or there's these, real negligent things. But so I'm wondering if Debbie could provide any clarification of typically which goes to which, and how do we help people know the difference and help them to know where to go. And I did appreciate Carol's comment, and I'm sure Matt has experienced this also as an administrator, because sometimes you have an issue and you have one parent who says it has to be done this way. And then you have a parent, an hour later that comes into your office and says it has to be done this way. And they are opposite ways or competing interests. And so I fear that sometimes people may feel like they haven't been heard if the answer isn't exactly what they want. But perhaps they have been, and the issue's been studied, but sometimes it will go in this favor, and sometimes might go in a different favor. I don't know, Debbie, if you can address any of that.
Cindy, let me put Michelle on the spot instead, if it's okay. And then if Debbie wants to follow up, but you're kind of asking a more, I think, technical, legal, or policy question. And
yes,
go ahead.
Yeah, we actually addressed the board member Davis's concern in the UPAC rules that you as a board approved in the rewrite. So issues that are competency issues of an educator that can be remediated through additional training and staff training, those are employment issues. And actually your new rules in the educator conduct explain the difference between the two types of conduct that is unethical, violates the State Board of Education's educator standards, are ones that should be reported to UPAC. And so those are, I don't know them all off the top of my head, but they're listed in your rules. And there was a great effort that the task force made to be able to make it clearer to LEAs which things they should report and which things they should take care of themselves, that were employment issues versus licensure issues. So without listing them for you, they are specifically listed in the rule and made much more clear than they were in the past. Of course, nothing's ever perfect and rules can always be made better, but the rewrite that you did based on the task force work gave that definition and the distinction between the two.
Can you tell us what rule that is you're referring to?
Yeah, yes, let's have, first, Natalie just asked if she could be informed what rule that is. Ben is on, I think it's an R277-200. What is it? Which one is it?
R277-217 is the new educator standards rule.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And then Cindy, yes, follow up, please.
Okay, so that's helpful. And we've got kind of what would fall under UPAC and what would fall under employment issues. And then where does our particular hotline fall? Is that something where things are reported that would be more toward the UPAC issues, or to refer back to employment, or do they sort of just fall right in the middle, I guess? And how are we communicating to the public? Is it on our page when they go in to submit the, do we have a little blurb in our audit hotline that goes first before they leave their vocal message? Or do we have something in the written that kind of explains to them, if it's this type of thing, report here, if it's this type of thing, report there?
Sure. I'm happy to- Is that
think-
okay, Chair, if I take that?
Sure. I think it's maybe partly your area and it's partly Michelle's, but go ahead, Debbie.
Sure. So with the hotline, we've developed on our webpage a where do I start document, and it does separate out what should go to an LEA and what should go to the state board. And it's not an exact science, but it does give an idea of the things that we've been talking about. What's employment, what's licensing, who has the jurisdictional authority. And that is one of the first things we look at when we receive a hotline. We do get both. We get things that would be considered an employment concern. We get things that would be considered a licensing concern. And so really what we do to educate once we get a specific concern is we pull that rule, R277217, and depending on the information that we've received, we're really weighing, did what come in? Does it look like it's a violation that's in board rule related to educator misconduct, a licensing misconduct issue? Or if it's not, then probably it's an employment issue. And a lot of what we do on the hotline is education. We point people to policy and regulation and say, this is what you're looking at. This is what's in place. And then, of course, the next step would be, if you don't like a policy, then go talk to the policymaker and see if something needs to be changed. But we do get both. We do try, and like I said, and I'll put it in the chat, we do have a where do I start document so that people can have an idea of, hey, this is, maybe this will give me some ideas of where to go. We get all kinds of situations, so we can't detail everything. I just added that to the chat, the where do I start. We have sent the where do I start document to our LEAs. We link to it in our quarterly newsletter fairly frequently that we distribute. But anyway, hopefully that provides some additional clarification, trying to get people to the right resource so that they can get resolution to their concern.
Thanks, Debbie. Cindy, and then let me just ask everyone, if you feel like your question's been answered, ask and answered in that order, please don't ask it again. And I'd like to wrap this up in 3 to 5 minutes because we've have so many other very meaty issues. So Cindy, did you need to follow up further?
Just a question for everybody to consider in the future. I think it might be helpful to have a little bit of training on that for the whole board. I mean, I've been here for nearly 3 years and I'm still learning which area and who goes where and what's involved. So thanks for the answers.
Excellent, duly noted. Angie, I hope you noted that, who's recently joined us. Thank you, Cindy. Matt, I'm coming back to you, but Randy Booth had a question, and then I'll come back to you, and then I'll come back to Natalie. Thank you.
I'm concerned, where do I start, whether it's a licensing issue, an employment issue, but what about a curriculum issue? Because I'm constantly telling parents, we do not presume to tell the local teacher and the local parent how to solve the problem for Johnny or Susie in the classroom. If there is a concern, as Natalie's bringing up, of a parent who's very concerned about CRT or something that's been happening in the classroom, where do they start and how do we, because in the last 14 hours, I've had a handful of calls from parents who said, okay, well, you guys all voted for CRT and and I said, we are not dictating to the local teacher, the local parent, what should be done in terms of any curriculum, whether it's CRT or anything else. But that is if something is being done that's not appropriate, where does the parent start? And have we clarified that in rule or in our website so that we're not just saying, well, that's not our problem, that's a local problem. But then if the local people are not dealing with it, then parents are frustrated, and rightly so. There's got to be a way that there can be some communication to to answer the questions and to ensure that the children are not being exposed to whatever it is that we don't want them to be exposed to. And I'm just not sure what that process is.
Randy, and let me just interrupt for a minute to make sure I understand. Are you asking that this rule be more clear? Or are you asking for more, or there be some additions to it? Are you asking for maybe the document that Debbie referenced, if that maybe it should be referenced in this rule? Or are you suggesting something else, Randy?
I just don't know, but I do know that there are parents with a concern. So I'm not sure, is there another document as a new board member? I don't know. Or is there some other instruction in addition to what we're looking at here that would answer that need of parents who are responding to yesterday's meeting and to everything that's going on?
Thank you. Angie, since you just joined us, let's put you on the spot. And do you have anything helpful for Member Booth?
Sure, I'll try. You are raising a very great question that many people are discussing, not just about CRT, but this was absolutely in play a year ago with respect to masks in schools, as well as the different instructional models. You know, what students were going to be receiving instruction in person or 100% online. You'll remember that was an issue last year where parents being frustrated with a certain school district that was 100% online were coming to the board and saying, state board, you need to tell district, it was Salt Lake City School District, you need to tell Salt Lake City School District that they should be providing, in-person instruction and not just be virtual. So that's just another example. There's so many. CRT is one. The decision to provide instruction in person or 100% virtual during a pandemic is another. We could probably keep going on and on and on, right? We see this often when boundary changes happen. For example, when school boundary changes happen and people are not happy with the decision of their district, so then they reach out to the board. So to answer your question, number one, I'll leave it to Debbie to kind of describe what their staff do when those issues come up and how they refer those to LEAs. I know the same happens in the SPED area where oftentimes our staff are needing to refer things back to the district, and sometimes we end up being kind of a negotiator of sorts. But that is something that there's a current group. You'll remember last session, they wanted, there was a bill that was proposed that would have had the State Board of Education or a small panel of people outside of the state board to review appeals like that of local school board decisions and charter school, governing board decisions. And I know there's a group looking at that right now. When you talk about governance, these are sticky issues. People, the lay person doesn't know what decision is made by their principal, what decisions made by the district, the local school board, or the State Board of Education or the legislature. And so you'll often have that confusion. We've talked about how do we get that information across. It's sounding like to me, you're wondering if there's some sort of document or these are not simple things, although I will say that there's a group right now working on categorizing who's in charge of what, essentially whose responsibility are, curriculum, for example, that is clearly a local LEA school district charter school decision. State board is in charge of standards. The legislature is in charge of establishing programs and providing funding. But they're working on right now a document that would kind of show who is responsible for what. Employment decisions, for example, that's definitely a district or charter school decision, but licensing, state board. So I don't know that this rule is the right place to address it, and it's not necessarily easily addressed, but I think what I'm hearing from you, Board Member Booth, is a request for maybe some sort of document or information that shows the different responsibilities of the different layers of government or stakeholders in public education that you as a board member could use, but also maybe something you could share with your constituents. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, I'm just hopeful that we're not just turning our head away from very concerned parents who have legitimate concerns. I want to make sure that we do what we need to be doing to support them in their efforts to be to be partners in the educational process for their kids. And I'm not sure how we do that, but I
think Angie gave us some good ideas. Angie, 30 seconds.
One last thing I would just say as part of this process, if, for example, board member Booth, the hotline or staff are receiving multiple complaints about a certain LEA and the way they're handling a curriculum issue, for example, that's when internal audit may recommend an audit of that LEA. So you'll see later on, it does say below, if you have these recurring issues come up, that might be the opportunity for our internal audit staff who are receiving these complaints to recommend an audit, which would then maybe address the issues you're saying. But there are a lot of enforcement and compliance mechanisms for the state board to withdraw funds. We have corrective action plans. And so depending on the area, staff may also do a corrective action plan for a school district or charter school. So I forgot to mention that as well.
That's a helpful information. Matt, back to you.
Very quickly, would it be appropriate to add the website to section 3, subsection 1? Is it appropriate to add a website that they go to in this rule, or was that?
So can you see quickly, I see where you're meaning on line 31, as part of the individual's hotline report. What were you thinking, or does someone else have a suggestion?
Or at the end of line 28, sorry, go back up. At the end of line 20, it says an individual may report an alleged violation, and then just put the, 27 now. For some reason, It's different on my paper.
Yes, I think that, do you think that's in order there, Angie, to add the hotline URL there?
We could do, yeah, I think
Perfect.
Put the insert the link there, or for the version that we post on our webpage, we could even maybe put a hyperlink over public education hotline and or on 28 on internal audit webpage. You could hyperlink either there. Yeah, we could do that. I'm trying to think of the best way. Is oftentimes anyway, I think we could do that.
I think that meets your intent, Matt. Can we leave it to them to find the best way to link that?
Yes, okay. Perfect. And then, section 5, subsection 1, there's just some unclarity that I just think that we can clarify, hopefully. First off, when it talks about substantiated or significant, is that like subjective to whoever's working on that particular case, or is there a rubric that is used to determine what is substantiated or significant?
So I'll take that. Angie probably, and whoever answers, please, brevity.
Quickly, yes.
Yes, internal audit does have a protocol, and it would go through a quality assurance process. So multiple eyes on it, determining if it was substantiated. And then, of course, it would go to the audit committee if we thought it was a significant risk, and they would make an ultimate decision to forward a recommendation for audit to the board.
So there is a rubric, but there's some subjectivity.
Yes.
And yes. And then on line 75, the superintendent, is that the state or the local?
State.
And does that need to be like just added for a definition, or is that just clear to everybody else except for me?
It's a defined term in our main rule.
Okay.
Capital superintendent.
With the capital, okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Natalie, did you have another follow-up question, just briefly?
Yes. So that chart, the flow chart that you mentioned, that helps parents know where to go, that might be another thing to link, if that's appropriate.
It's not prepared yet. Board Member Klein, I apologize, but it's not finished yet.
Oh, okay. Or when it is.
Something being prepared, just for your knowledge, sorry, by the legislative staff right now, but
helpful.
That could be something once we have something like that, but maybe we could adapt, as a board document, and then either have that outlined. I know that Debbie's staff, they do have something currently on their education hotline that gives a little bit of guidance for what might be appropriate to work with your school, your district charter school, or the board. But I don't know if we have time to go through that. But if you're interested, Board Member Klein, maybe Debbie Davis or I could show you that hotline page and some of the resources they do have there for parents that maybe would help some of your constituents.
So
You
you mentioned that there's a part on, or a section on our webpage for parents to help them know where to go. Is this rule going to be linked there for them?
I'm sure it could be.
Okay, because and you go ahead.
I'm so sorry. That's the page we're going to be linking to, is the public education hotline page. And I was going to try and find it quickly to show, or maybe put.
Oh, not to worry. We trust you there if you say it is.
I just linked it. It's in the chat.
Okay.
Natalie,
So
further?
anything that helps the parents know where the buck stops. So I like that you've got a group that's working on, who's ultimately responsible, because that's the biggest frustration with parents, I think, is getting the runaround, everybody pointing to everyone else. So that would be super helpful, I think, in solving the problem, so that administrators and others also know that they are ultimately responsible when it comes to this. So the runaround stops.
Super helpful. Do you have a final? Is that all, Natalie?
I think that's it. So thank you so much.
I have one just final grammatical change I'd like to suggest without objection, line 52. Staff is actually a singular verb or noun, but it doesn't feel right. But if we could say on line 52, if a staff member requests additional information without objection. And then we also have the amendment that Matt proposed on line 2728. So whoever makes the motion on this, if you will make the motion as amended, that would be appreciated. So do I have a member willing to make a motion on this?
Meryl, could you check with Tracy? Tracy, did you think you wanted to add?
I thank you for reminding me. Tracy Watson is also.
No comment. No comment on 123. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tracy. So I don't see any other lights, any other hands raised. Would somebody like to make a motion?
I'll make the motion.
Thank you. Natalie.
I move that the committee approves R277-123 draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
If we can add as amended, the motion
as amended.
Approves R277-123 to draft 1 as amended on first reading and forwards to the board for approval on second and final reading. Any final discussion? I really appreciate your questions. They were thoughtful. Appreciate staff responses that were also thoughtful. Will committee members please vote? I see, there we go. I see that everyone has voted and it's unanimous, and thank you so much for that discussion. We're switched over to how Ben is doing the driving, so thank you for that. Thank you for that good discussion. We will move to item 2.5, which is R277-315, Education Professional Learning Procedures and USB Credit, which is a new rule. I'm not sure if it's Ben or Jennifer Thronson. Which one of you would?
I'll go ahead if I may, Chair.
Thank you.
Ben Rasmussen, Director of Law and Professional Practices. Good to be with you this morning. We have two agenda items that go with each other here. R277-519, which is the next item, is coming up for its 5-year review. And as we're in the process of renumbering the licensing rules, what we're proposing to do is to adopt this new R277-315 and then to repeal R277-519. This governs the procedures for professional learning credit. The only substantive difference between the two rules is that there used to be a cap for the professional learning credit that could come from the course, and based on some feedback from the field and some things they've seen in some courses, specifically from some drivers ed issues, as I understand, they're recommending that cap be taken off. So the recommendation then therefore is to adopt draft 1 of R277-315 and then repeal R277-519. And Jennifer Thronson, I believe, should be on if you have questions.
Anything to add, Jennifer? Jennifer. I see her picture, but not hearing her voice.
I am here.
There you are.
This one's actually the staff member is Katie Hill, so she should be on to be able to speak to it if you guys have questions. I'm happy to answer, but Katie's here.
Katie, do you have anything to add to our very brief but appropriate introduction?
I don't have anything to add. I wanted to introduce myself. I'm Katie Dewey Hill. I'm an educator development specialist in teaching and learning, and so I've been focusing on the professional learning credits and legitimizing them across the field. And so thank you. I just wanted to, so nothing to add.
Great, thank you for your introduction. And I do not see any board members with any committee members with any questions. Man, I don't see Matt at all. Did he go away? No, there he is. I still see his picture. There you go. So I don't see any questions. Let me just say that I appreciate any broadening of any of these categories. If we're going to leave this open, as it seems like is the inclination, I hope it is as open as possible for teachers to earn professional credit to renew their licenses. I think that's, it makes it fair for everyone. With that, I'll entertain a motion on R277-350.
Chair, I would move that the committee approves R277-315 draft 1 on first reading and forward it to the board for approval on second and final reading.
Perfect. And the motion is that the committee approve R277-315 draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. Committee members, please vote. And I see that everyone's voted and it's unanimous. Thank you very much. Please remove your votes. We have the next rule, which is, has been so ably explained, is a repeal because now the numbering's changed. So item 2.6 is just a repeal of this same rule from a different place. Would somebody like to make that motion? And
I can make the motion.
Please, Natalie.
I move that the committee repeal R277-519 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
Thank you. The motion is that the committee repeal R277-519 on first reading, forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. Any final discussion to that repeal motion? I see none. Would the committee members please vote? And I see 3, 4, 5 votes, unanimous. Thank you very much. Thank you for that efficient approach to that very simple change. The next item is item 2.7. This is a discussion about career and technical student organizations, R277-914. This would be, now we're turning to Jeff Van Holten and Talia Longhurst. So I'm assuming.
Jeff isn't with us. Angie, are you going to present this?
Talia, are you going to talk about this? Is that what you asked, Ben? Or
I was
Why
saying.
don't you have Talia start, if that's all right, Chair, and then you can help with any amendments, Ben and I, if there are.
Super helpful. Go ahead, Talia, R277-914. And please introduce yourself.
You bet. And by the way, Jeff Van Holten is on his way in. My name is Talia Longhurst. I'm the Director of Career and Technical Education here at the State Board of Education. With me for this item today, I have Wendy Morton, who is one of our CT coordinators. In case you have questions, I can answer. This rule is being reviewed and continued. And while it was open, we had a couple of changes we wanted to recommend, relatively minor. The focus of this rule really is around the state level organizations for career and technical education student organizations. We have 8 in the state of Utah. They're running well, and we're very excited about the opportunities they provide for students. Board member Committee Chair Lear suggested a couple of minor grammatical changes, which we appreciate. And you'll see those in your board backup as draft 2. And I'm happy to take any questions that you have.
Thank you. I'm looking for questions from the committee. Hands raised. I don't see any yet. None. I'd like to, I appreciate you indulging my grammatical changes. That's really nice of you. I would also like to say I had a concern, and I still do a little bit, but I'm willing to put it on hold and see what comes about in other related rules. And that is, years ago when I worked at the state board office, there were, even then there were concerns about fee waivers for students in these leadership positions, because sometimes there was an opportunity for travel for award winners, and some students, it was almost the thinking in those days was that students couldn't even be those award winners if they couldn't participate in the award ceremony, which was in Houston or Dubuque or some other place like that. And I thought that was really unfortunate, and that was before the additional scrutiny on fee waivers. So I am deferring my concerns about making sure that these leadership organizations are staying true to the fee waiver rule and fee rule, and expecting to find that language in an upcoming rule, and not going to make an issue about it in this rule. But I really want to make sure that every student has an opportunity to participate in these leadership organizations to the full extent of their achievement, and it's not limited by their family circumstances. So that was super important to me, but I'm also willing to delay it and see what comes about in a rule where maybe it's more appropriate. So just with that comment and concern, but not asking for any change, I am looking for a motion on R277-914.
Draft 2.
Draft 2, thank you.
Like a motion.
Please, Matt, thank you.
I move that the committee approves R277-914 draft 2 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
Thank you. The motion is that the committee approves R277-914 draft 2 on first reading, forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. Any final discussion to that motion? I see none. Would committee members please vote? I see 5 votes. That's unanimous. Thank you so much for your careful attention to this, Talia, and for Jeff, who I still couldn't quite figure out if he's with us or not, but in spirit. So thanks so much for that. And we will move on and look for more information to come on in this area. So our next item is item 2.8. Which is a sunset review and recommendation for hospitality and tourism management current technical education pilot program. And we again turn to Talia and/or Angie.
Chair, if I could just give a little bit of background, and then the lion's share of the presentation will be Talia.
Great. Thank you.
Just as a reminder, the legislature is going to be reviewing 5 programs over this interim of programs that could be sunset. And this is one of those programs, the hospitality. You can see kind of a little summary of the program and the fact that the Education Interim Committee, likely in September or October, will be considering whether they should just allow the program to sunset, which means it would go away, it repeals the program, whether it should be continued for a certain amount of time or continued indefinitely. And so the Education Interim Committee has asked that the State Board of Education provide a recommendation on each of these sunsets. And so Talia will be giving you some background information and the staff recommendation on what to do. So if Board Member Lear, if you could turn the time over to Talia, she'll provide some background and the staff recommendation.
Perfect. Thank you, Angie. Talia.
Thank you. Again, my name is Talia Longhurst. I'm the Director of Career and Technical Education at USBE. With me for this agenda item today, I have Rachel Rout. Rachel is one of our education specialists in CTE, and she oversees our business and marketing pathways. So I'm going to give you, I think, a little teaser. I'll do the end first, and then we'll give you some background information on this particular program. The teaser that I'm going to make is really the recommendation that we have for you today, which is that we are hoping that you will recommend that the legislature continue the Hospitality and Tourism Management Career and Technical Education program and account for an additional 2 years and not allow the committee to sunset. This is really a program that came to us without our request, but has allowed us to step back and look at some needs that we have in the state in the area of hospitality and tourism education. And we partner with our friends over at GoEd. Actually, I have to get used to the new language. The new terminology for GoEd is Go Utah, and working with the hospitality and tourism folks there. The funds for this program on slide number 3 come through the state transient room tax, and the funds are intended to provide resources for entry-level positions in hospitality and tourism management, including live instruction, video, and online materials. And LEAs apply to participate. It's not really super competitive. If they apply, if they express interest, we put them into the program and provide them with these resources. On the next slide, you'll see that last school year 2021, was really the first year we had full participation, full program, maybe I'll say it that way, a full program available for LEAs to participate in. And you can see, I should check your screen because I'm working off of a different, yep, you can see right there that the number of LEAs, we had 16 who opted in. Those 16 LEAs represented 22 high schools and 643 students. This school year, we have 11 participating, representing 23 high schools. Well, so while you have a decrease in the number of LEAs, slightly more schools that are choosing. And really, as I think about why that is, why you have differences and people opting in and out over time, it has to do with the teachers, with the pathways that they're able to offer, their particular qualifications. We know we had some retirements this last year, and perhaps they weren't able to hire a teacher for whom this was something that they wanted to offer. It could be that you have a small school where they offer particular courses every couple of years rather than every years, which is something that we see regularly in career and technical education. This year, we've also provided training to the LEAs, all of them, in how to use the resources. And if someone were to decide to opt into this program through the year, they are welcome to do so, and we would be able to provide resources for them. On the last slide, you'll see information related to fiscal numbers. While the bill was passed originally in FY17, it took a little while for the money to get to us because it's a tax, revenue from taxes. We actually don't get it until later. The beginning, the earliest that we saw funding was really towards the end of FY18. So you'll see some balances there. We went through an RFP process. 2 vendors were selected to provide resources, and LEAs can choose which of those 2 vendors they prefer. You'll see our balance. We do have a balance, but we anticipate continuing to spend that money out. And our reason for recommending an additional 2 years is that we want to continue to work with the vendors, work with schools to determine the need and the value of these resources to those schools and whether this needs to continue in an ongoing basis. So with that information, I am happy to take questions.
Carol, you're muted.
Thank you for the reminder. I said I'm really excited to see this. I have a number of my children's friends who graduated from college in this area and neighbors, and I'm glad to see that it now starts in high school. I think it's a great idea, and that it starts slow is to be expected. Matt, you have questions?
Yeah, I'm just looking at the numbers here. It's such a small percentage. I know that there are, 643 out of over 500,000 kids. I just want to make sure that this money is going to an appropriate source. I hate to be that guy, but
no, that's a legit question. Talia, do you want to respond to that?
Well, I think my first response is that LEAs choose, right? We don't tell them what to teach, what pathways to teach. They have to determine what their local economic need is. And I would put in a comma there and say that we know that hospitality and tourism is an economic driver in many of our communities here in the state. But they have to look at what they want to teach and what pathways they want to include, and then make sure that they have teachers who are qualified in this area to teach those programs. So it really is something that we continue and will continue to work with LEAs on to help them understand what's available, what options they have, and what resources are being provided for them, and encouraging them to teach these courses.
And of the, if I could, Chair, is that okay?
Sure, please.
Well, if there's 643 students involved, do we know how many of them went into this field?
Well, so if I may answer, the students just finished the class in June. So we don't track any kind of placement data and until next spring. And even at that, it's not aligned directly to whether or not they went into the particular field for which they took classes. And it may just be that some of those 643 students took a class, and we may not be able to track that back.
So any thoughts in light of that, Matt?
I don't know. You put me on the spot, Carol.
No.
I don't know. Like I said, I struggle. It's like a 0.1% of the population. I know that it's not a large amount of money either, but I just want to make sure that these programs that we are approving are benefiting. We're over general, and I know that there's 643 students out there who probably had a great experience. I just want to make sure we're doing our part for the overall population. And I don't know, if it sunsets in 3 years, we want to add an additional 2 years, so that would go to 2025. Is that right?
It looks like,
or is it 2023?
Looks like 24. Is that right, Talia? Is it 2022 or 2024, or what is the year that we would next review this?
I'll let Angie answer that question. I'm going to place my bet on 2024, but I'm not the expert.
Angie's nodding her head.
I agree.
So I think my personal sort of response to that, Matt, is I share your concern about scarce resources. And if those of those of you who are here in 2024 review this and can have a memory of being concerned about numbers, I would feel comfortable looking at it then and making a stronger recommendation.
And I can support that as well. I do ask staff if you could, even some sort of tracking. I would love to see how successful this program is in strengthening our economy, right? I don't want it to just be another elective and say, oh yeah, I took that. It was great. Or I took that course. It was fun, but I really wasn't interested. I'd love to see it bleed into our economy and help and provide jobs and all that stuff. I don't know how to track that. That's a task I'm asking for the staff to take on. Maybe we can review.
I think a really important request, and I hope there's mental notes being taken. So with that, I see no further questions from committee members. Is there a motion that a committee member would make?
Chair, I would move that the committee recommends that the board recommend the legislature continue the hospitality and tourism management CTE program and account for an additional 2 years in code and not allow the program to sunset.
And the motion is, thank you very much, Member Booth, that the committee recommends, the board recommend the legislature continue the hospitality and tourism management career and technical education pilot program account for an additional 2 years, clarifying that would be 2024 in Utah code and not allow the committee to sunset. Yes, it's not allow the program to sunset is probably more accurate. So that's the motion. Would committee members please vote? And I see 3 votes, 4 votes, 5 votes. It's a unanimous vote, and we support this for 2 more years, and then we'd like more data. Thank you very much for that background, Talia, and your explanation. Super helpful. And we are moving on to to item 2.9, which is an action item on R277-312 online licensure. And we have Ben Rasmussen and Malia Height. How would you like to handle that?
If I may, Chair, R277-512 is another one of our rules that is nearing its 5-year review, and that so this is similar to the previous situation where we're asking the committee to repeal one rule and adopt a new rule. We have gone through this rule and kind of updated the language to make it more consistent with the new licensing changes and also with the board's ongoing plans to implement USIMS and the Educate specifically, which will replace Cactus in that. So we've gone through and we've made some recommendations to update language in that regard. Draft 2 was added to Civic Clerk just a day or 2 ago. This includes some recommendations from Chair Lear to update language and make it hopefully more clear for the committee. And so I, along with Malia, can answer any questions that you have about this rule.
Thank you. I don't see any questions immediately. Would you scroll down, Ben, to line 88? I still have a concern on line 88 that says the superintendent may void a license transaction that was completed on the basis of inaccurate information at any time, only with notice, doesn't say only, with notice to the license holder. I have a concern that that could happen, might happen without the license holder having an opportunity to respond. I had this brief email exchange, I think, with Ben or Malia on this, and maybe the committee would benefit from hearing their response, whoever was responsive was, publicly, verbally. Ben or Malia, I think it was Ben that responded to me.
I know I talked to Malia. Do you want to take a stab at this? Because this would be more in your wheelhouse. You would be the one that would move the license transaction.
Sure. Malia Height, Educator Licensing Coordinator. Happy to address that question. This is really in case there's some sort of an error. If, for example, if somebody is awarded an endorsement, but it was the wrong one, and this is more common now because we have a lot of people fingers awarding licenses. But I can say that we have in the past, it happens very rarely. In the last year and a half, I think it's happened 2 or 3 times. And it is typically it's because of either the educator provided information that was inaccurate, or there was an error in our entering the data into Cactus. So even when a license transaction is voided or canceled and the educator is notified, there's nothing that says they can't apply or reapply. Unless there is a UPAC situation that needs a referral. So there's nothing punitive to the educator when a license transaction is voided.
Okay, I guess I can buy that for now. Member Hymas, did you have something?
Yeah, is this to go along with Chair Lear's question? Is this section 4? is it in a standard order? Like you have to do one before you can do two? For example, I mean, you look at the process here, and by the time you get to 6, it looks like 6 might be the last resort, right? Like they may void a license here.
Monitoring program.
Do they go through 1 through 5 before they can get to 6 before, or is that just, am I way off here?
Malia?
That is an interesting question that I think might be more on the legal side of things, because a monitoring program, we may have found something that was provided with inaccurate information independent of monitoring the licensing. And so it isn't necessarily a linear path that you have to go step 1 and then step 2 and step 3. They're all independent clauses within the rule.
Okay.
Does that make sense or help, Matt?
Yeah, that helps.
Okay, I will again defer to the staff's judgment on this. I'm still a little uncomfortable hearing that it could be that that you're thinking more of a clerical or as much of a clerical as something that a license holder might believe she could enter, and then it's deemed to be inaccurate information, and she's and the license is voided. Then believing you that there would be some opportunity for discussion, that it wouldn't be you're off the island and you have no opportunity to return, but rather
Sure.
that it would be subject. Yes.
I think it might be helpful if we gave an example of the last time they did this, if I may.
That's fine.
The last issue that arose was a situation where an educator had applied for a license and was given his license, and then we received a hit from NASDAQ that showed that his license was suspended in another state, which means that we could not legally issue the license here in Utah in the first place until that previous license was resolved. So we were able to void his license. After the fact, we gave him notice. He took steps to resolve the issue in the other state, and then ended up reapplying, or at least following through on the application process, and got his license taken care of. But the educator was able to resolve the issues. It wasn't just a situation where it put an end to things in the situation.
A helpful example. Thank you. And I am just going to trust there would be that kind of give and take. I think I said, now I'm kind of recalling my conversation with Ben, and I think sometimes people in state government don't, and this maybe goes to some Natalie's and Matt's concerned with a previous rule or two. Sometimes we, when we're in a state position, we don't realize how weighty our decisions feel to just normal people on the ground. And not everyone has the self-confidence to seek recourse or push back, and especially if there's nothing built into a rule. So I am sort of sensitive to that, having been on both sides of this, and that was my concern about the way it was written. But I am willing again to see how it plays out, to see if I see if there are concerns that come up, and I hope we would hear about them, maybe through the hotline, maybe through another process. If an educator, just like a parent, feels like he had no recourse in an action like this. So with that, I'm fine leaving it the way it is, and I have no further questions, and I see no further questions from the committee. Would somebody like to make a motion?
Reminder that recommended action should be draft 2.
Draft 2. Okay.
I can make that motion.
Thank you. Go ahead, Natalie.
I move that the committee approves R277-312 draft 2 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
And the motion is the committee approves R277-312 draft 2 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. And any further discussion, final discussion? I see no hands. Please vote, committee members. And I see 5 votes, and that makes it unanimous. And then we have the repeal action on the rule from a different motion as well?
Sure. I move that the committee repeal R277-512 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
Thank you. The motion is that the committee repeal R277-512 repeat on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. Committee members, please vote. I see 5 votes almost. Yep, we do. Thank you very much. That's unanimous also, and that is repealed by the committee and forwarded to the board. Thank you again. Thanks again. Thanks for those that discussion, Ben and Malia. I think you were indulging me a bit, and I appreciate you repeating it. So thank you very much. We are moving on to R27-211 item, and this is a discussion of R277-106. And we do have a public comment on this, but let's hear the explanation, and then we'll go to the public comment, and then we will go to any committee member discussion. So with that, this would be to Ben Rasmussen.
Thank you, Chair. So the UPAC appointment process rule is approaching its 5-year review. This is largely established in statute, but this rule adds some clarifications to this process. For those not familiar with this, we largely recruit UPAC members each year during the month of May to meet the June deadlines established in statute. UPAC members are appointed by statute by the superintendent. And so we basically, staff recruits the members and we consult with the superintendent in making these appointments. Not much significant change being proposed to the rule, a few technical language things as I recall, but beyond that, I'm happy to answer any questions that committee members may have.
Okay, and I think Tracy Watson from the UEA had requested to make comment on this, so we will hear her comment and then we'll go to the committee. Tracy, are you on?
I am.
Please, go ahead.
Thanks. This has come up before and it's just a question really. Lines 42 and 43 talk about the application to the superintendent by May 31st and the corresponding statute, which I will put in the chat, says that nomination petitions must be filed prior to June 16th. And so it's just one of those things that I don't think that language in the statute prohibits setting the deadline to May 31st, but I think it can be confusing. If somebody doesn't know about laws and regulations, they might only go to the statute. Or they might not go anywhere. I don't know.
Can I ask a follow-up question to Ben? Have we, in your recollection, that's too far back for me to think back that far, but in your recollection, Ben, have there been people who have submitted applications between the end of May and June 16th that you haven't been able to consider?
No, when we take applications each year, we send out a memorandum to a large number of groups, all the LEAs, the UEA, a lot of interested organizations, and we specifically tell them, we have an application. It shows what the deadline is. So I don't think there's ever been any confusion on that. If I may add as well, I know that Ms. Watson's raised this concern in the past. We've consulted with our AGs in the past, and they've said that they felt that was consistent because our deadline is before what the deadline is created in statute. And given the timelines that we have to meet, we've always felt that May 31st is the best deadline to use for our purposes.
Tracy, do you have any further comment?
I don't. Thank you.
Thank you for raising that issue. I did not know that. I don't know that I feel strongly enough to make a motion, but I personally wouldn't mind changing it to the same date that's in statute so that we could eliminate the confusion should it occur, but I'm fine about leaving it. And I would like to hear if there are ever any applicants that you know of, Tracy or Ben, who are misled by the statutory deadline and so miss the regulatory deadline? I think that would be helpful to know if that problem comes up, and we can certainly revisit this. Are there any other questions on this rule? Natalie?
Yeah, I just had a couple questions. I don't know what line it's on. It talked about parents being able to apply, or individuals from the largest parent association. What is that? Is that a specific entity or entities that you're drawing from, or is this any parent group?
So that's, if I may respond, Chair,
please.
That's language that comes straight out of the statute that creates UPAC. And it's generally been interpreted to mean the PTA. And so the two parent representatives that we have on UPAC currently we solicit recommendations from the PTA when those vacancies occur based on the language that's in the statute. I can put the statute on the screen here, probably, if you have.
I think you were there almost.
I just know there are a lot of parent groups organizing now, so beyond just the PTA. So I don't know if.
So the statute says 2 of whom shall be members nominated by the education organization within the state that has the largest membership of parents of students and teachers. And to date, we've interpreted that to mean the PTA. If there were evidence that were now some other organization, I guess that's something that we could look at for the future. But historically, that's been interpreted to mean the PTA.
Okay, and then I had a question down around line 55. It's the hiring based on demographics, and while I'm not opposed to there being diversity on UPAC, I wonder, is there something else that you're looking at as far as qualifications besides just demographics? And would that, and would the demographic requirement supersede others that may be better qualified? Does that make sense?
So we're looking for balance in a lot of areas. I think if you look at the numbers right now, gender diversity, we're heavily tilted actually towards women. I think there's 3 men and 8 women on the commission. Right now, it's all white people. Actually, we had one African American up until a year or 2 ago, but we're somewhat limited in who we get applications from, and we get several applications, but we don't always do a great job at getting that type of diversity. It's something that we can consider. But I would say that the bigger consideration, at least when I make my recommendations to the superintendent, is having a balance of different types of teachers as far as throughout the spectrum of K-12, having different types of administrators, having special education expertise on the commission. And that's the kind of thing that I'm looking for when I make recommendations to the superintendent, who ultimately has the final say. But these are just all things that we can look at in trying to achieve a good balance. None of them is really given.
So I guess my question is, when looking at a candidate, what is the top priority? Filling the demographic diversity requirement or qualifications? And if qualifications, what are the qualifications that are being looked at to determine?
Well, I think all the applications we get are generally from experienced educators. In the recommendations I make to the superintendent, I'm usually looking for a balance of more towards the elementary and secondary and specialized knowledge of cases that I know come to UPAC quite frequently.
Okay, so the qualifications and experience are your number one priority. Is that what you're saying?
We look heavily at those, yes.
Okay, and the other is secondary. Okay.
And if I can add, having had the job similar to Ben's, part of my job was similar to Ben's for a lot of years. Unfortunately, Natalie, we're not talking about receiving 30 or 50 applications. It's a real emotional commitment and it's a time commitment. And so usually they're lucky if they get 2 or 3 applicants. And so one thing that maybe this committee could do as well as others is if we have teachers or individuals who would fit any of these categories, if we would encourage them to apply, that would enrich the pool and make the selection, give us more opportunities, give Ben more opportunities to recommend to the superintendent. So, and I really would love to see Ben to have 20 people to choose from. It's unfortunately not that rich of a pool usually.
And we actually get a lot of administrators. We probably get 20 administrators each year, but you're right that the number of teachers that apply for the positions is usually not very large. We had probably 6 or 7 this year.
Which is, I always thought spoke well of our teaching ranks, that they hate missing their classroom. They hate missing school, and it calls for them to miss school 3, 4, sometimes 5 days a month. And that with hearings, between hearings and meetings. And so it speaks well of our teachers, but you're right, the administrative ranks are easier to fill. Thanks for that. Natalie, did you have a further question?
No, sorry, I'll take that.
Oh, no problem. Any others?
Thank you.
Thank you for those responses and an explanation, Ben. I think a motion is in order. I see no hands.
I can do it. I recommend that the committee continues R277-106 draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
The motion is the committee continues R277-106 draft 1 on first reading, forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. Any final discussion to that? I see none. Please vote, committee members. Thank you. 5-0, that's unanimous. Thank you very much. Thanks, Ben, for that, answering our questions and making that explanation. Appreciate that. We are moving on to the next item, which is item 2.12, R277, an action item R277-321, Para-Educator Teacher Scholarship Program. This is a new rule, and we will look to Ben Rasmussen, Tanya Semerad, and Leah Voorhees to discuss this with us.
Thank you, Chair. So this is another one where we have two action items going together in concert. We would be asking you to repeal R277-526 and to adopt this new R277-321. This is for the Para-Educator to Teacher Scholarship Program. This is a rule that's been in place for about 5 years now. It's coming near 5 years that, if I understand correctly, that it's been in place. It's up for its 5-year review. The big change that we made to this was on the Scholarship Selection Committee. You'll see on line 52 that we added the superintendent there in place of a board member. That's part of the changes the board has been making, taking themselves off a lot of these advisory committees. And so we made that change consistent with that approach. But like the chair indicated, Tanya Semerad can answer questions, or Leah Voorhees can answer questions if you have those on this rule.
Either Tanya or Leah, do you have anything to add to Ben's introduction of that? I think it was Leah. Yeah, and I don't see their desires. I think Cindy has a question, please. Member Davis.
I'd like to make the motion.
Oh, okay. I don't see any hands by committee members. I don't see anything that needs to be added. Please go ahead, Member Davis.
Let's see, I need to repeal the first one. So do I just add that language into the recommended action?
No, there will be two action items. So you can make this motion first, and then we'll bring up the next one.
Okay. I move that the committee approve R277-321 draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
The motion is that the committee approves R277-321 draft 1 on first reading, forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. Any further final discussion? Any clarification? Excellent changes, I thought, and a great program. So please vote, committee members. I see 5 votes, making it unanimous. And so that this rule moves on to the board. Anything further to say about the repeal there, Ben?
No.
Okay, then you want to make a motion on the repeal, Cindy?
Sure. I move that the committee repeal R27-526, repeal on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
The motion is that the committee repeal R277-526 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. Please vote, committee members. And I see, Matt, there you go, 5 votes. We are unanimous again, and we appreciate your, I feel kind of badly when the several of you are here waiting through the tedium of the early issues on the meeting, and then we take care of your item in less than 5 minutes. But thank you. We really appreciate your attendance and the possibility that we might have questions. So thank you to the 3 of you, Tanya, Leah, and Ben. Moving to item 2.14, there's been a lot of discussion back and forth on this. I can't remember, Kathy, I'm asking for your help. Were there 2 people wanting to make public comment on this?
I think you'll have public comment from Joel and Royce on this.
Okay, then let's have the introduction first.
That's right. That's all I have.
Oh, thank you. We'll do what we did before. We'll have an introduction of the rule, then we'll go to public comment, then we'll go to committee discussion. So go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair.
You're in charge. Go ahead.
So R277-324, the amendments that are before you today, draft 2 is now the current draft, just so you're aware of that. It includes some changes based on some last minute feedback from board members and stakeholders. But this was initiated based on recommendations, I believe, from the audit committee that there should be more clarity provided towards the roles of paraeducators in schools. The amendments in this rule are a collaboration between the teaching and learning program, the special education department, and the title programs who have been working on this and who have also sought extensive feedback from LEAs as to what this rule should look like. They've provided some significant clarification to what's expected as far as supervision of paraprofessionals and what roles paraprofessionals should appropriately take. And Leah Voorhees and Lauralee Gillespie have been the leaders on this, and I believe they're the ones that can answer questions that you may have on this rule.
And Leah or Lauralee, do either of you have anything to add to Ben's introduction of this? Not.
Chair?
Yes, go ahead, Leah.
This is Assistant Superintendent Leah Voorhees. I just want to add that we did send out the original updates to the rule to Title I directors and special ed directors, curriculum directors earlier this summer. We did receive feedback. Lauralee did summarize that feedback for you in the backup. But then we've received quite a bit of feedback since then, just in the last week, which is not summarized in that chart that she made for you. So just so you have a comprehensive view of the vetting of the updates.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you. Let us turn to those 2 individuals who would like to make comment on this rule. Let's go to Superintendent Joel Coleman from USDB first, and then we'll go to Royce Van Tassel with State Charter School Association.
Thank you.
Joel?
Are we working off of draft 2?
Yes.
Okay. So my only concern has to do with line.
Yeah, the draft 3.
Oh, I'm sorry. Is there a draft 3?
It's updated with feedback that stakeholders have given.
Okay.
It's draft 2. I think there's a typo on the top of the page, but it's draft 2.
Is it this? This has the one we're looking at, Ben, has all the changes. Is that right?
Yeah, and like I said, there's a typo in the header, but it is draft 2.
Okay.
I apologize for that. Just
Is
noticed.
that okay, Cindy? Does it look different than what you are looking at?
Yeah.
Sorry, in Civic Clerk, I saw a draft 3 that had incorporated feedback that came in as recently as last night. So I thought we had a draft 3 in Civic Clerk.
I think this is the most recent draft.
This is the one that I've got on the screen is the last one that I worked on.
Okay. Cindy's
And that's draft 2.
Go ahead. I'm sorry to interrupt, Joel. Go ahead.
That's okay. My only concern is just with line 61 on draft 2 that says they shall not be employed in lieu of an appropriately licensed teacher or related service provider. We actually agree with that concept. And I just think that's clear in everything else that we have in the rest of this rule and other rules, that you need appropriately licensed teachers to perform teaching duties. But my concern with this is that it's not necessarily needed to enforce this concept, but it might become a problem with us. With some of our paraprofessionals, well, in a sense, all paraprofessionals are essentially hired in lieu of a teacher to do. If we had unlimited teachers that were licensed, we would only have them working with kids. But that's more philosophical, I guess. The pragmatic approach for us is we do hire paraprofessionals to do things that teachers do. Like, for example, a TVI, a teacher of the visually impaired, is licensed to teach Braille to children. We also hire ESAs, or education service aides, paraprofessionals who are experts in Braille that just teach Braille to kids. They don't do any of the other teaching with children who are blind or visually impaired. So that's one example. And I don't necessarily think USBE is going to come in and, look for problems like this for us, but just the wording in the rule, I think, matters. And so I think the concept of this is fulfilled without having this sentence by all the regulations we already have. And I don't want to have to, it's hard enough to find licensed people to do everything we do with all of the related servers that we hire and everything else without just having another, as you know, special education is highly regulated and there are so many compliances that we have. And so for that purpose, I'm hoping that we could maybe just remove that line and the intent would still be there through all of our rules, this one and others as well.
Laura Lee, Leah, would you like to speak to that? Is there do you have any thoughts about Superintendent Coleman's comment?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
This is an area of conversation that's been going on with several people. So Superintendent Coleman, it makes a lot of sense that you're bringing it forward. I think the concern of the committee as we were working on this and trying to draft this rule is kind of the opposite, which is using the words in lieu of as an instead of, meaning essentially that we do have teachers that are available and we're choosing instead to hire paraeducators instead of. And maybe the language is confusing. I do agree that in practice and best practice would be that we are hiring licensed teachers and service providers, but it's the concern really is on the opposite end. It's the having the teachers available and choosing paraeducators instead.
You kind of faded out at the end that I couldn't hear. Could you repeat the last sentence there, Laura Lee?
Say that again?
Would you just repeat the last sentence that you just?
Well, the concern just is that there are teachers available and we're choosing to hire paraeducators again and instead.
Okay.
So, and I understand wanting to prevent that from happening, but if this line was not in there, it already would not be okay to do that, right? Because of all of our current rules of licensing of teachers as it is. And so I would rather err on not making this, putting this in this rule and with another redundancy, because I just would hate for it ever to become a compliance issue for us where they say, sorry, TVI was my one example of probably many that we have, but sorry, you've got to hire a licensed teacher for this when a paraprofessional could do the job really well. Anyway.
But to that point, let me just speak to that. So if you have a person who's a paraeducator who can work with a student with a TBI like you're describing, but we also have a qualified teacher who's available to work with a student with a TBI, why are we hiring the paraeducator?
Except that it's cheaper.
Well, we don't already have, that's my point. And so,
no, but that's what I mean by in lieu of. In lieu of means instead of. So essentially what we're saying is there is something that's available and we're choosing to hire a paraeducator anyway.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is when there's not something available, we don't have enough TVIs. And so we hire education service aides in lieu of a TVI that we would hire otherwise.
And I think if maybe we're just arguing or differing on the words. I think Laura Lee's point is that if you don't have them, then it's not in lieu of.
Exactly.
It is you're hiring who you have, who's the best qualified, and so you're already doing what the rule directs. Okay. If you don't have a teacher that you could choose, and you instead choose the para.
Okay, well, I see. I guess the term in lieu of is what has thrown me off then, because we do hire them instead of a teachers when there's not a teacher available.
Right.
But not to do, we're still not hiring them to do the responsibilities of teachers, of licensed teachers. But that's why we use paraprofessionals, is because it's appropriate and necessary instead of a teacher, which we would hire if we had them. So that's why we're going to be out of compliance technically with the language in that line, although it's not our intent to replace teachers with paras.
No, and I think Laura Lee and I are saying that you're not out of compliance because you don't have a teacher that you could hire in that spot.
And perhaps that's where we need to address it within the language by stating something about a teacher not being available. Maybe we do need to wordsmith that.
And you be thinking on that, Laura Lee, if you would be so kind.
Absolutely.
And Mr. Van Tassel, while you're looking at maybe clarifying that.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Thank
Royce?
you.
Thank you. Royce Van Tassel with the Utah Association of Public Charter Schools. My concerns largely reflect those that you heard from Superintendent Coleman. I think we're all aware that there is a significant shortage, not just of teachers, but more specifically of licensed special education teachers. Moreover, in the current environment, as I talk to a lot of charter school directors, we find significant pressure on finding a qualified paraprofessional, because while their heart is often or is almost always in wanting to be in the classroom and help those students, there are times when they can frankly make more money by going over to McDonald's. And so the danger that we face isn't just, do we have this choice between a teacher and a para, but will there be enough of either of those available? And so I worry that this language puts pressure on that school to guess what the state board thinks was appropriate, even though the state board may not be cognizant of the applicant pool, either for teachers or paras that school has, or have the specific knowledge of that school's budget. And those absolutely end up driving how you decide what the mix of of teachers and paras that you have at your school are. And again, this language, given the ambiguity that we just discussed, and the need to make these decisions at a very local level, make it really difficult for LEAs to know, are we in compliance or not, because of that ambiguity.
Thank you. Does that complete your comment, Royce?
It does. Thank you.
Thank you for participating. Laura Lee or Leah, substance was similar to what Superintendent Coleman had to say. Do you have anything to add? Nope, I don't see any.
I mean, in terms of the language, it's been moved, so I can't see it on the screen. I can pull it up on my own screen, but.
Line 54. Oh no.
Okay, well, it was there.
Yeah, it's there, line 54. Oh, but don't keep doing that. Line 54, friend B.
No, it's not line 54. It's.
Oh yeah, it's
61.
61. I'm sorry. Go up.
So would it be more appropriate to say be employed instead of an appropriately licensed teacher or related service provider when one is available?
Or I even thought of saying this and see if this helps at all more to Joel than to Royce. Be employed in lieu of an available appropriately licensed teacher or related service provider.
I like that even better.
Would that address what your concern was, Joel? He's nodding his head.
Yes, that would be great. I think that helps me feel a lot more comfortable.
Member Davis, let's hear from other people. Let's hold that thought for a minute and hear from other people. Member Davis.
Well, I have 3 amendments to make.
Okay.
But I was just wondering, in regard to line 61, do we have published like teacher student ratios for, I know there are certain guidelines, but anywhere in policy for students to teacher, what's appropriate and what's not, students to teacher? Because sometimes we even have the ratios met, so to speak, but there are additional tasks that need to be done on top of that, for which you would hire a paraprofessional. I just wondered if we have any ratios, and it doesn't need to be a long discussion because I really want to get these 3 amendments made, but I'm just curious.
Do you have a short answer to that, Laura Lee or Leah?
Chair, this is Leah.
Go ahead.
We have had in the past caseload guidelines. There are not any rules, and the guidelines are actually very old and outdated. So the answer is no.
All right. Thank you, Leah. That was brief. Cindy, are you ready to make your amendments? Your proposed amendment?
Yes, thank you.
And I don't want to just leave that hanging. I'll come back to that other one, but go ahead, David.
Actually, can we have Alex make Angie a co-host so that she can put up Cindy's amendments on the screen? She's been incorporating them into a draft.
That'd be great. That'd be helpful.
And they're actually going to be shorter, Angie, than what I sent to you.
Okay, go ahead.
Because part of what I sent to you, I realized after, is already included in some of the language.
Okay.
So Chair Lear, I have 3 amendments. Would you prefer that I make all 3 amendments and then speak to the group? And then if someone wants to divide the question, just in the interest of time, they can? Or do you want me to do these one at a time separately?
What you said first, that would be great.
Okay, I move that on line in R27-324, line 51, it reads, A, be responsible for selecting or administering formal diagnostic or psychological instruments, or for interpreting the results of those instruments if their training, licensure, or other forms of certification do not align with the administration and interpretation requirements stated in an instrument's technical manuals.
Will you explain each of the amendments as you go? It's got to be apostrophe S on instruments.
Sure, I'll do a quick explanation, then we may need to go back and open it up for committee members as they want to, but the quick explanation, just also, before I explain this, these all come from stakeholder feedback from either university professionals or our charter association. So this is where these thoughts are stemming, and I'm trying to be responsive and wrap my head around what we can and can't do in this rule.
And remember too that this section begins with a para may not. So go ahead.
Yes, and also I just want to point committee members' attention to that there have been changes made to line 36 and also changes made to line 41 to 42, and those were changes that were just clarifications in direct response to some stakeholder feedback, but the ones that I'm going to make are a bit more substantive.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so this one here is, there was a concern that the original language had said that paraeducators can never help implement or give any kind of diagnostic assessment. And into this, the greater issue is that sometimes they're giving it in ways that are contrary to the what's expected from the diagnostic instrument itself. So it's not, if I understand, and I certainly hope that Leah or Lauralee will come in and correct me if I'm understanding incorrectly. Originally, I thought this was like a federal requirement, but it's more a concern that the test be administered appropriately. And so what this amendment does, and it was recommended, by others, like I said, is it helps us understand that you don't necessarily have to have a licensed teacher to administer the test, but you have to have someone who has been trained in the assessment, who does have the proper training according to what the assessment feels is the appropriate understanding or training. Shall I do the next amendment, or do you want?
Let me just ask. Let me ask a clarifying question about that. We are talking specifically about diagnostic or psychological instruments, not assessments of all kinds. Is that what you intended to be limited to?
Paraeducators can help with informal assessments. They can help even with summative assessments as directed by, our teachers. If they're asked to do that, they can do all of that stuff. But if it's a specific diagnostic assessment, they need to make sure they have the specific understandings to give that assessment, which are your Acadience assessments or, things such as that.
Just to clarify as well, just to a point, in the special ed rules, it does speak to this type of testing needs to be done in compliance with the testing administrator's requirements. And that's where this is really coming in part, is we want to ensure that whatever the testing administrator requires, that we're being compliant with those requirements in order for us to get really an effective outcome of the assessment. We want to make sure we're doing it correctly.
So this amendment would be consistent with special ed rules, is that right?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Great. I see no other questions. Go ahead, Cindy.
Thank you. In R277-324, line 5D, there's been so many changes. I hope I've got my numbers right now. I would like to add the words elements of an. So shall I speak to that?
I'm sorry, I'm still not seeing where that goes.
Me too.
Okay, sorry. Let's go to line 58 through 67, 5D. Right? Yeah, it's on 60 here on this one.
Okay.
So it says be assigned to implement an IEP. Well, a paraeducator should never be assigned to implement an IEP in its entirety. So, that always is going to be overseen in a large umbrella way by the teacher. So I think this needs to say, or at least folks in the field have said, this needs to say implement elements of an IEP. So my motion would be, I move to add the words elements of an after the words assigned to in R27324 line 60D.
Implement elements of, after implement, you mean, implement. Is that in the right place, Cindy?
Yes.
And I'm sorry, can you go scroll up so we can see what the introduction to that section says? A paraprofessional may not still. Okay, that's fine, helpful. Thank you. I don't see any, may not be assigned to implement elements of an IEP for student disabilities without direct training, supervision. Okay. Thank you, Cindy. I don't see any other questions or clarifying concerns from any committee members, so go ahead.
Okay, I think this last one is in line 69. Actually, it's 71 in this draft you have up here now. So I move in R277-324 line 71 to replace C with the words provide the supervision and support they deem appropriate for a paraprofessional to work effectively in their respective roles and responsibilities.
And to clarify your pronouns, they deem appropriate and them, who does that refer to?
That refers to the licensed educator.
Okay.
Or the licensed service provider.
Okay. So with the supervision and support.
But that's already that's already indicated in line 67.
A licensed teacher shall work in close and frequent proximity. You want to replace that. Shall provide the supervision and support the teacher deems, no apostrophe, appropriate for the professional, appropriate for the paraprofessional, support to the paraprofessional that the teacher deems appropriate for the, what about the end of that? How do you want that to read, Cindy?
Deems appropriate for a paraprofessional to work effectively in, this says there, I know the pronouns don't match, I apologize, their respective roles and responsibilities.
Because you're indulging my grammar obsession.
I know, it bothers me too, but I don't know how to fix it on the spot.
The word roles and responsibilities. Roles plural or just role?
They may fill a variety of roles. I think it's fine.
Okay.
And just a quick kind of explanation there. I think there one seems to refer a little more to geographic closeness, and I think it's understood by this rule. There needs to be quite a close understanding that certified teachers are looking at the IEP, responsible for implementation, and they're kind of designing instruction, and then our paraprofessionals are following up with that. They are providing supports and tasks and activities and assignments that support all of these things that are designed and overseen by our certified teachers. And I know there are some confusion and some questions in other parts of the rule about that, but I I do think in general, it's pretty clearly understood that, you know, paraprofessionals are not the ones who have the main responsibility for teaching students in special education. Teachers have the main responsibility for teaching students in special education, but they may not always be side by side or in any geographic close proximity. A paraeducator may go with a student who's in a co-taught class down the hall to provide some extra support, while, you know, one of the, you know, the teacher may have to be in the hall for a time or what have you. I mean, there's going to be a variety of situations where they won't be right next to each other or hip to hip.
Thank you. And Angie, just again would you take the apostrophe out of Deems on 72? And oops, I'm not.
Sorry.
Yeah, thanks. No, perfect. Would any of the committee members need these to be separated or voted on separately, or are we okay with looking at these combined? I'm not seeing any committee member who's expressing any concern about voting on these collectively.
We talked about adding the word available on 63. Do we still want to do that?
I did. I wasn't sure if I should do that. Are you okay about adding that to this group, Cindy? An available, appropriately licensed teacher.
Yeah, I'm okay with it as long as the intent is understood, that we are not saying that there can be a school that has no special educator in it if special ed students are in it. And that has actually happened. So that is really the crux of the issue. And I don't know if, you know, before we get to our large full board, if we pass this through today, there's some kind of,
I see what you're saying,
clarification that can be made. But and the reality is sometimes you have more students in a class than you want, and you can't find another teacher. And so you do have to hire paraprofessionals. And that is the reality where the rubber meets the road. But this is not intended to say, and I hope it doesn't communicate that, hey, if no one applies for your special ed job, brand new school A, just hire some professionals and you'll be fine, because
you can argue that nobody was available.
Correct. It's like that's an anomaly example, but because I'm hearing that it has happened, I am concerned that it sends that kind of message.
Any response, and in addition to Cindy, my ideas, and Matt, do you want to, are you speaking on this issue, or?
Yeah, just briefly, I'm still, you know, I struggle when we put things out that are unclear. And lines 63 and 64, this section has been unclear. So, I mean, until we get clarity, I would just remove it, because it's just causing confusion. Now, I don't know if that's an amendment or what, but it just doesn't. We talk about intent, but when we're reading it on our own, or an LEA it's put in front of an LEA, and they're left to just decide what the board staff was thinking, or the committee members. You understand where I'm headed here? I do.
I have an alternate. Yeah, and I would oppose removing it completely, because I think the concept is so crucial. But I can't say I won't entertain your amendment because of that. So let me see if Cindy Davis can add to our discussion.
I haven't crafted a motion right in my mind, but I think something that would clarify this would just be that paraeducators shall not be employed to fulfill the responsibilities of certified teachers as outlined in code or rule or what have you. And that's what I think they're getting at intent-wise by saying in lieu of, you know, you can't hire a paraeducator to, you know, sign the IEP, design the instruction, oversee other paraeducators, you know, all of this. I think there just needs to be some clarity in the language that a paraeducator should not be hired to fulfill the responsibilities of an appropriately licensed teacher or service provider as outlined in this and rule and other
as required by law.
Yeah, someone inevitably is going to come back and say, well, a paraeducator does responsibilities of a teacher all the time. He's sitting over there in the corner running times tables. A teacher can do that, or they're working with a small group or what have you. And really, that's a valid point. It's true. But there are some very specific things that a licensed teacher must do instead of a paraeducator, like, you know, supervise and direct others. Anyway.
I personally like that, but I'm afraid it might be inconsistent with what Matt was getting at. What do you say to this, Matt?
No, I think that this offers clarity.
Okay.
It does to me as a reader. Of course, I've been having this conversation for a little bit, but I appreciate that amendment.
Oh, good. Okay. Thank you. I think Joel Coleman, though you're not part of the committee, Joel, I'll be indulgent this one time for a very short period. Go ahead.
Thanks. I hesitated to even raise my hand, but
Good thing.
my overwhelming thought is, and you might have resolved it here, but isn't that the purpose of educator licensing in the first place? It is to ensure that only licensed educators can be hired to do licensed educator things. And to put this into the paraprofessional role seems maybe redundant or obvious, but maybe no harm done. So that's all. Thank you for letting me talk today. I appreciate that.
Sure. And thank you for the point. I think that could be argued, but I personally think sometimes this is helpful clarification because this keeps happening. And though we know it is, we know it's the law, we know it's supposed to be happening this way. My opinion is the reminder is appropriate because, or the repetition is appropriate because some LEAs do this anyway. And so being able to point very clearly to this rule, being able to set off teachers, licensed teachers from paras, I think is worth the repeat, my opinion. Do you want to speak to that, Cindy?
I just think, you know, what Superintendent Coleman makes sense. And then you've still got that anomaly out there where we have had folks hiring paras instead of teachers in the entirety of the school. And so somewhere we've got to clarify that if you have special ed students in your school, you've got to have special ed teachers who are directing and guiding directing and guiding the implementation of the IEP. And then the paraeducators help with elements of the IEP, but really the paraeducators are there to support instruction that the teacher designs. So I don't know if this adds clarity or not, but I hope it does. I think it gets more at the intent than what the original line said.
Member Booth.
I just want to publicly state that this discussion is evidence of the care and the attention to detail that the board, that our superintendents, that our staff are taking in every one of our rules. And I'm just grateful that we're interested and care enough to be squirming over these little details. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Randy. I think that's a compliment to staff and to Cindy who worked hard on these. Let me just ask Laura Lee or Leah, if this change or any of these changes for that matter are in any way contrary to what the special ed rules say or to the ways that paras should be used appropriately.
Chair,
go ahead, Leah.
Laura Lee.
No,
Laura Lee, go ahead.
I was just going to say, in terms of consistency with special ed and title rules it is consistent from that perspective.
Super helpful. Thank you, Leah. Nothing else. Okay. So Cindy.
I may need help from a parliamentarian. And let me just note, I think I'm also hearing what Lauralee is saying and not saying that there's still a concern that you might have a school that hires one special educator and 20 para educators when there could be real need for more special educators to be hired to work more consistently with students. And I do hear that. And if we need to create some additional clarifying language in those lines prior to the full board meeting that we bring back, I'm happy to work on that. It is, sorry, Dr. Vorhees, he's had something, Chair, and then I'll move forward with trying to figure out how to make all these amendments in one motion.
And I think you can just make them all in one motion, but go ahead. Dr. Vorhees, you had a comment.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So I just want to remind you all that on the agenda for the Standards and Assessment Committee this morning, which is now this afternoon, if they get to it, the Utah Special Education Advisory Panel has made a recommendation actually that you do exactly like Vice Chair Davis just suggested. And so that's something that the committee will either this month or possibly next month be discussing. That recommendation that USEEP has looked at this rule, they've looked at the feedback, they've looked at the implementation of the rule, the audit recommendations, and is recommending that the board consider creating minimum supervision and training requirements, not a ceiling, but a floor. And because of that, Chair Hansen asked me to put together some data about other professions and the minimum training and supervision type requirements. And so I do have that data that I will be sharing with the Standards and Assessment Committee. Just for your information, it speaks directly to the point that you just made, Vice Chair Davis.
Thank you so much. Thanks. That's such helpful information, especially it's very timely coming just from Standards and Assessment. With that, Cindy, are you prepared to make a motion?
Yes.
Okay.
I move that the committee approve R277-324 draft 3 on first reading and move to the board for approval on second and final reading.
With amendments as previously explained. Is that implied, I guess?
I think because we wrote the amendments into a third draft.
Okay.
You can correct us if that's wrong.
Great. Does that sound okay to you? Any of you faux parliamentarians?
Yes, they were all incorporated into draft 3. So that motion, approved draft 3, includes all of the amendments.
In order. All right. The motion is that the committee approve R277-324 draft 3 and move forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. Any final discussion to that motion? Thank you very much to the those who helped us, who participated. Royce, thank you for your comments. Joel, thank you for your comments and your persistence in helping us understand. And thank you very much to the staff in this very technical area. So with that, I'll ask the committee members to vote, please. I see 5 votes. Thank you. That's unanimous. And thank you very much for your expertise. This is a really technical area. I feel like I know less every year in the special education area. I'm like moving backwards in time like Merlin the magician. Thank you. With that, we just have a few minutes left, but I'd love to have a brief discussion of our item number 215. If that would be okay with you to just, I don't know that we can go over. Angie, do you have any any information about that? I think you're muted, Angie.
Not muted, thank you. Before you move to that next item, could we just quickly approve the repealer that goes along with the rule you just approved?
Oh,
Like
yes.
those to happen at the same time if possible.
Yeah, no, that's so helpful. Thank you very much. The item 2.1, no, 2.14. No, yeah, I don't see a repealer on that, Angie, on
I
324.
thought they approved the repeal on that, Angie. Did I miss it?
Oh, am I in the wrong one? Maybe I'm in the wrong one. I
Yeah,
apologize.
there's no repealer that goes along with 3.
Thank you.
Oh, phew.
My
Thank you very
bad.
much. No problem. With that, Malia, are you all right about taking 10 minutes and just introducing this whole complicated, frustrating idea that takes 2 hours and 10 minutes, but let's get started. Thank you.
Yes, happy. I'm Malia Height, Educator Licensing Coordinator, and today we're bringing a discussion item to the committee relative to our new licensing structure. We have one of the new license types that is within the new structure is the LEA specific, which is granted by local LEAs. And in the rule, our 277-301 in section 7, subsection 4, it says that any renewals of these kinds of licenses or license areas or endorsements shall be approved or denied by the board, and then following that subsequent renewals may be approved by the board on a case-by-case basis. And so in this first year of implementation, there were some LEAs that granted LEA-specific licenses for only 1 year, and now are trying to renew these licenses. And so then we have to find a way to get those approved or denied by the board. And in discussing with Chair Lear, this is an onerous process and perhaps is not what is intended. And so really the purpose of the discussion is to determine what ideas or ways that we could alleviate some of these constrictions and cumbersome processes in order to provide greater flexibility to educators, to LEAs, and ultimately the board. And provided in the backup, there is a list of the breakdown of license types by FTE and LEA, and that is available on our website all of the time, but I provided that for you. And as well, this pie chart that shows that 5.1% of our licenses in the state are LEA specific. So with that, I am open for any clarifying questions or to hear any perspectives that may help us as we look to implement the new structure and improve our process.
Oh, thank you. That was really brief and very much to the point. Do any of you, I have been just conversing electronically with Malia and maybe somebody else for weeks. So I feel like I almost know, I don't know too much. I know a lot about this and I've perseverated a bit. So I don't want to necessarily belabor that. Any of the rest of you have comments? Do you understand what the challenge for the board will be if we have to review every one of these applications for a LEA specific license and approve it or disapprove it? Is that come through in what Malia offered? I'll let Cindy talk so I quit babbling. Go ahead, Member Davis.
I just have a question. I mean, I can see the onerousness and I would like to see a summary every so often of what our numbers are looking like in the field, just similar to this. And maybe that can be provided on some type of regularly determined basis. My concern more is I'm in this strange space where I feel torn between what the public is telling me about two different things. And part of this goes to the associate professional, but part of it really does speak to the LEA specific. And that is that in some areas of licensing, we have teachers that are teaching in areas where safety conditions are a huge concern. And so, you know, we're hearing that LEAs may not have the expertise or training to really provide and say you can have an LEA license in this area and guarantee the safety of a child. On the other hand, or even to go through the associate to professional process. But on the other hand, I'm going to our rural school meetings and I'm hearing our rural folks saying, we need more flexibility. We need more flexibility in every area. And I'm assuming that especially includes these hard to find, especially more kind of CTE type courses. So I feel like I hear them, they need a teacher, but I don't want a life or a limb or a finger on my head as a board member, because we have somehow abdicated our responsibility to create guardrails around some of these specific teaching licenses that require real student safety concerns. So could you help speak to that for us a bit?
Yes, and if I may, this list of all of the FTE breakdown is posted regularly on our website. We post it quarterly with updated numbers, and I have put the link there for you, and it's it's the first link, percentages by FTE and qualifications. And to your second point, when LEAs request this license or endorsement on behalf of an educator, they are required through this board rule to submit a list of assurances, a letter of assurances. And one of those assurances is that the LEA assumes responsibility to assure that the educator in question receives all necessary training to cover those kinds of situations where there is safety involved, and they are required to train them on the teaching standards and educator ethics and basic special education law.
And Malia, can I just interrupt you? I'm so sorry to do this, but I think it's maybe really exactly the crux of the issue. I know you're right. It says that, but does anyone ever have? Does our office have the manpower to ever go back to a district and say, so what exactly did you do? Or where's the documentation of that assurance?
So when they submit their request for these licenses, we require that they submit this letter wherein they have linked their LEA's policy on the on who they hire, how they hire, and how they train these specifically licensed educators.
But there's no link to a participation list of individuals who actually did the training. Is that right?
That is correct. Because it's an assurance, it is on the LEA to make sure that those things happen.
Okay. Thanks. And I'm sorry if you can pick up where you left off. I'm sorry to interrupt, but that is the crux of the problem, that there is only an assurance. There is an assurance, but there's only an assurance. And certainly the state, if I were suing somebody for a lost or mangled arm or limb, I would not sue APA. Well, I'm not a good example. Sorry, Matt. I would not sue a very small charter school. I would sue the state. Or I would not sue Daggett School District. I would sue the state. So, but go ahead.
Well, I think that really kind of concludes my thought on that topic. One other thing to keep in mind is that this specific license type of the LEA specific is outlined in state code as one of the licenses that the LEA or that the Utah State Board of Education shall award.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm just answering Angie on how long we'll try to keep discussing this. Cindy, do you have another question, or were you just or further clarification?
It piggybacks on what you said. I mean, in the cases of safety, I really would like to know who is deciding and who is implemented the necessary training. And are we culpable at the state board level to create some expectations or share some expertise with these tiny districts and rural schools when there are significant safety concerns involved beyond a paper and a pen class? I don't know if we need to make a motion to explore that a bit more or what, Chair Lear, but I don't want to feel responsible for that by saying all these LEAs can do whatever LEA license they want to without our involvement. LEAs now, which we've already said, I guess, can go and do, associates and professional licenses. We need it because they need the flexibility, but then there's these caveats of safety. So I don't know, Chair, if you can help.
I think this is just a discussion item today. So I think that the staff members are listening and they would maybe explore, if I'm not sort of assuming too much, some of the staff members would be able to explore some of the questions and concerns we're expressing about safety. Would that be a reasonable, fair expectation, Malia? Okay.
Yes,
thanks.
Absolutely.
And I would like in that explanation to maybe explore what we might do about assurances, so that, and I don't know if you can separate some assurances from other assurances, because math teacher assurances don't have any safety consequences for students, but a lot of the CTE areas have literal safety wellness issues for students that I fear in our efforts to be so flexible, there's some perfect balance that I hope we can aim for. I was informed by Angie that we do have another meeting that starts at 1. We have staff members who need to take a break. We need to take a break. So if we're okay, I would like to continue this for maybe a few more minutes, or maybe we're at a natural pause point. Do any other committee members have any thoughts or comments about this opportunity for the board members to look at LEA specific renewals versus our the labor intensive nature of it? Any other concerns or comments, or maybe Cindy, and to some extent, maybe I'll speak for myself. Maybe I'm being a little too paternalistic, and maybe we just say, hey, LEAs, this is local control, the good and the bad of it. Does anybody want to speak to that? Because that's certainly one side of the coin. I see no hands. We're probably a bit weary. So thank you for introducing this, Malia. I think that it will come back. We may have an opportunity for a longer discussion in an upcoming meeting, or maybe a rule will come to us that would propose something that gives us some more specific ideas to react to. So with that, we didn't get to 2 other information items, and I apologize, but I very much appreciate the board's members' preparation and participation. It's been very enlightening for me, and I always appreciate the staff. So with that, I think we can say we conclude the Law and Licensing Committee meeting for today. Thank you, and we'll see you in 40 minutes or so. Thanks a lot. Again, thanks so much to all of you and your preparation.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Take care. Thanks.